Okay. I'll call the Londonderry Planning Board meeting to order for February 13th, 2013. I just want to point out that if we have an emergency, you need to evacuate. This room has two exits, in the front and the back of the room on the right-hand side of the audience. If we do need to evacuate, we ask you to proceed through the exit closest to you, go outside, move away from the building, don't come back into. Our fire officials have instructed everyone to do so. I'd like to ask for everyone to please rise and pledge allegiance to the American flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to ask everyone to please still stand. I just will ask for a moment of silence for John Michaels, who is a very noted town resident and attorney and passed away on Monday. Thank you, everyone. Okay, we have a full board here. Scott, his father is ill, so he won't be here. I'll appoint Letha to vote for Scott. So we'll have 9 voting members. And our meeting is this is 3 parts. We have administrative board work first, our discussions with town staff. We have our continued plans, which is Pillsbury Realty Development, and then we have a public hearing in regards to our growth management ordinance. And that's a determination of gross sustainability. And hopefully we'll be through that, not too late an hour. But I'll start with the administrative board work. We get our business done, and we have discussions with town staff.
I have nothing this evening.
You're all set?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually do have one item. I just wanted to mention that last week we expected that Hickory Woods would be coming to the board with their application for site plan and subdivision. And they had several issues that were checklist related. And after speaking with them, they agreed to not come. They're going back to design review, so they're in design review now. One of the things that came up was the fire department's concern about the width of the road, where they had been proposing now for several months that it would be 24 feet wide. This is a private development of 55 and older housing. It's located between West Road and Route 102. The roads themselves are somewhat circuitous, and they lead to a, if you recall from the conceptual discussion, to a circle around the center. There is a cell tower existing in the middle of it. And their question going forward is, now that they have to go from 24 feet to 28 feet, which is the town standard to accommodate the fire equipment, there is no requirement for a sidewalk, and is the board okay with that? And this is really a yes or no question. So.
That's up to the board.
Mr. Chair, I know you usually start at one end or the other, but if you don't mind, I just...
Yeah, I was just anyone to jump in at the
Yeah,
moment.
I'm not
I'll go.
okay with them they don't have to do a sidewalk, but I'd like to see some kind of walking path, because if this is 55 and older, I mean, I know I'm over 55, so I'm not old, and neither is 55 or older, but, you know, in terms of, we want our subdivisions and things like that to be walkable, so I would still want them to have a path, even if it's a pathway like what's out in front of the high school, you know. Doesn't have to be a sidewalk, but I would still want to see a path.
Okay, John.
Cynthia, what's the requirement for a sidewalk?
There is no requirement for a
None.
sidewalk. This is a site plan, nor do we have them in our subdivisions, so.
Okay, but if I recall,
I
you
think
know,
it was-
with the master plan stuff going on, the big comments were around walkability and movability, you know, without vehicles. You know, so does that not fall into what we're seeing as a trend now? Is having some type of path or walkway, not necessarily sidewalks that border the street, but some type of path or walkway, as you point out, that's not gravel or dirt or something like that, I'm assuming.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Rick?
What's the developer's reason for not wanting one now, just because of the width of the road, or?
Yes,
Is it has to do with the setbacks of the buildings, or?
all of the above, the width of the road, and it impacts everything.
So they won't be able to get as many units if they had to change and put one in, or?
I'm not sure that that's true, but it does require a complete redesign of their drainage system.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Letha, yes.
Are they confident they can sell these units without a sidewalk?
They seem to be. The Nevins, apparently, there is a sidewalk system, and the people, from what we're told, tend to walk in the street because you have to go up on the sidewalk, and between every driveway, you're dropping down and coming up again, so it's actually more comfortable to walk in the road.
And that would basically be the same in this
Right.
particular development.
I'll start, Maria.
No, I kind of agree with Mary's point, but without seeing plans and seeing anything on paper, it's kind of hard for me to make a comment, really.
Anything else, Letha? Okay,
I'm all right for now.
Laura?
Sidewalks are a nice idea, but if they're not required, they're not required.
They're not required, but every time we've ever sent anything to all of the people that we send them to, we usually get a comment back that says, make some kind of walkable path in this subdivision. And, you know, when you're talking about 55 and older, you're talking about people who want to be able to get out and walk their neighborhood. So I just feel that it doesn't have to be on both sides of the road, just one side of the road, and, you know, I just think there should be one there.
Lynn?
Do the roads there go through, you could go from West Road to 102?
You can, but you're going up and down and around, and then around the circle, and then kind of, it's curvy, and there's a vertical transition that's pretty,
No easy
Straight
way,
shot.
not a straight
All the
shot.
better to keep them spry.
you know, so there may be a little bit more traffic than we would normally expect, because you can make the transition through if you had to, but
But I don't
I
think
like the
anybody would
idea of
want
having
to.
sidewalks in a neighborhood like that. I think it just makes a lot of sense.
I think you're giving enough feedback, because again, I know the development team is here, so they're hearing what the question that we asked. We told them that we'd ask the board.
Okay.
May I
Laura?
just ask one more question? Sorry, you
Yes.
can go around and then come back to me, I don't
Oh, no,
mind.
that's fine. No, that's fine.
Well, I'm just wondering, if you're asking us what our opinion is, that's one thing, but if you're asking us, do we have the power to cause them the expense of a redesign in order to design in sidewalks, that's another question entirely, and I'm not clear on what question we're trying to answer here.
Does the board prefer to have sidewalks in a neighborhood like this? That's the question.
But are they really asking, what is our preference, or are they asking, are we gonna hold them to making sidewalks, which will cost them a lot of money? I mean,
That's the
aren't
same
we,
question.
You know,
if we say we want sidewalks, although we don't have the power to require them, we're asking them to go back and do a redesign. Is that correct?
Well,
That's
don't they
my-
have to redesign to widen the roads anyway?
yeah, they do, but again, limited more so than adding the pavement plus the sidewalk.
I thought what Cynthia just said is if we require them, if we say that we want sidewalks because we can't require them, then they need to redesign their drainage system and the engineering that goes along with that.
Correct.
I just want to be clear on what
Yes.
question we're answering, that's all. I'm not trying to be difficult, I just want to know what question we're trying to answer.
I think money is irrelevant. I think, again, they want a consensus of the board, whether or not the board would want to see the sidewalk out there.
John, did you just say money is irrelevant? I think, though, that they are going to have to redo the drainage anyway if you expand the road, right? Correct? So it's
They
not
will.
as though adding the sidewalk makes, I mean, it makes an additional step, but they still have to redo the drainage anyway.
Correct.
Probably incremental.
Please, go ahead.
Okay. Letha?
My personal preference is, as it's not a requirement, I would challenge the engineering team to come up with some type of solution. If it's not your typical sidewalk, we'd want to see something, as Mary suggests, that's a path that can be utilized and people aren't walking on the road.
Would the board be more comfortable seeing the plans, or maybe our next meeting to,
Well, again,
Review the
they just
plans.
wanted to see if we could get some sort of
Oh, just a
consensus from the
consensus.
board. Again, we told them that we'd see if we could get a consensus. Best thing is for them to come to the board themselves, but again, just try to help them out along with, in the time frame. That's why we said that we'd ask the question this evening.
Okay.
So we're spending too much time.
No, it's the little stuff that spends the
Yeah,
time.
exactly.
John?
Yeah, again, when they had the 24-foot road, did they have sidewalks?
Yes, they
Yes.
did.
So they now are being asked to go to the standard sidewalk,
Standard
Road.
road width. Yeah.
road width. So why do they go to the 24-foot in the first place if they knew we had a standard in town?
Because we do allow a 24-foot wide road, but again, typically it's with open drainage.
Okay, so,
So the fire department's concern is, again, they're at 18 feet with their ladder truck, and due to the density that they're proposing out there, it's 18 feet from outrigger to outrigger, and the 24-foot wide road doesn't give them a whole heck of a lot of,
right, so again, if they were going to go 24-foot wide road with a sidewalk, and now they have to go to a 28-foot wide road without a sidewalk, right? I mean, it sounded like they had already planned to put a sidewalk in, and now money is an option, apparently, because of redesign. And now they're looking to see if that's something, if it's in their plan that they want to continue with, or have them continue with.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Tom?
Just so I'm clear, they don't have to do anything, right?
That's right.
Right?
It's not in the regulations,
Either a path or a sidewalk, right?
correct.
Okay, thanks.
Rick?
I would love to see a sidewalk, but as Tom said, since the regulations don't require it, I guess they can do what they choose to do.
So, raise it, how many for a sidewalk?
Or a path, or something.
Sidewalk or path. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7. Okay, sidewalk. We'll get
Thank
that
you.
taken care of. Anything else?
No, that's all. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
I don't have anything, so we'll get right to
Just
Bill.
a quick question. I don't know if it's, if we know now or not, but are we thinking about a meeting for the last Wednesday of the month, or will that depend on the outcome of tonight?
No meeting?
We were
was
not
canceled.
planning on a meeting for the 27th.
Okay, so confirm that.
You get the night off then. But be prepared, just in case. No, I think anything would be the next month,
It's
but,
fine by me.
yeah. Okay, continued plans, Pillsbury Realty Development LLC, tax map 10, lots 15, 23, 29C-2A, 29C-2B, 41, 41-1, 41-2, 42, 45, 46, 47, 48, 50, 52, 54-1, 57, 58, 59, and 62. This is an application acceptance and a public hearing for a formal review of the Woodmont Commons Plan Unit Development, better known as a PUD, master plan. And this is continued from the meeting of January 9th, 2013. And at that point, we had looked at land use. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the presentation and discussion of transportation, open space, framework, definitions, and glossary of terms. After that, if there's anything from last meeting, we take that up then. The questions and answers that some have been on our website, staff has not had the time to keep up with them. We'll handle those on the 13th of March. That'll be a month from tonight. Cynthia?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I believe that Mr. Cecil has an alternative to that, and I think he can
Okay.
share that this evening.
He'll talk about that during the presentation.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. And, you have the floor, gentlemen.
Okay.
Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Ari Pollack, attorney for Pillsbury Realty Development. To my left is Steve Cecil, one of the planners on the project. And behind me, Mike Kettenbach, who's here for Pillsbury Realty Development, the lead applicant. Also Rick Chelman. Jeff Wilson will be doing the open space presentation with Steve. And also behind me, Kevin Dandrade, Jimmy D'Angelo, and Rebecca Brown from TEC. They've taken the lead on traffic and transportation. And also behind me is Annie Michaels, sitting with her mother Nancy. Annie's a project team member and also taking John's role this evening. I wanted to just give a very brief overview of where we're headed for the evening. Your description is spot on. We're here to focus in on transportation and open space, but the briefing document that we dropped off a week ago also included a follow-up or a recap of some of the open issues from our land use discussion. And we just wanted to draw the board's attention to that as included within the packet, so that the board would understand that we know there are some open issues to circle back to on land use, not the least of which, of course, is the flow of density within the PUD land area, and how we might do a better job of regulating that flexibility. And so it is on our screen to come back to. We know there are other items there as well that require some follow-up, but we did not want to take time away from tonight's scheduled focus topics, which are transportation and open space, at least until we got those topics out in front of the board. So I don't know if Steve wanted to say more about land use, but then I'm actually going to step away and ask the traffic consultant to run the transportation presentation.
Well, the topics that, as Ari mentioned, that were in your briefing package are in the slideshow as well. And we've made sure to include a few slides to orient people who see the slideshow later or see this at home, where we go through the various topics. And while we're going to be focusing largely on transportation and open space, and we'll mention a little bit about building up this glossary of terms, and making sure that the purpose of the briefing is constantly oriented back to the application for this PUD, we wanted to emphasize that we are tracking throughout all of these briefings the preparation of what will be the final document. So every time we go through this, we are thinking about the chapters or the sections and the subsections that we'll be addressing. And on the screen behind you, I just wanted to emphasize that we'll be focusing on open space standards that are actually part of, it's a subset of the land use. And we pointed that out at the last briefing, that we'll be talking about open space and a dimension of it that is really about the whole PUD. But then there will be open space standards that dig into it in a much more detailed way, even looking into future briefings. The transportation side of it, we're largely focusing on this evening is the impact analysis that's been prepared and what the implications of it are, so that we can be anticipating mitigation and improvement requirements that we'll be speaking about in crafting. As far as the land use is concerned, we did a presentation in which we described a kind of a system of sub-areas and overall use allocations, and it's reasonably complicated as a way of making sure that things are balanced throughout. At the end of your briefing package, there are a few pages which provide some responses to some of the questions and some insights that we're picking up on and moving things ahead on. So, for example, the considerations about the density along the PUD perimeter, where it's along where there's single-family housing. We're revising the table so it can't be interpreted in a way that would actually increase the density. The idea is that streets have the same kind of character of housing on both sides. There were a number of comments about the ability to move development from one side to the other, and if you took all the sub-areas and added them up, for example, all the housing could theoretically show up on one side of the interstate. Well, that was not really what was intended, and so we're going to be reducing that significantly so that that the percentages don't flow that strongly back and forth if you add up the sub-areas. There were concerns about the maximum building heights. Well, they're not. They won't be uniform building heights. They need to be modulated so that they are responsive to the edges. So we've given you a number of points, and I won't go through those in detail. They were in your briefing package, but just to let you know that we're picking up on where the key issues are, where clarifications or modifications we think will make this a stronger PUD for everybody's benefit. From there, though, what we wanted to focus on mostly this evening was to talk about the transportation impact analysis. And
Steve's
some of the
throwing me out.
findings. There you go. Thank you very much, Mr. Pollack and Kevin. I can roll this for you if you want to, or if you just press on the this button there, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Kevin Dandrade, principal with TEC, member of the project team, and February is traffic month, so we're excited to be here. And this is the culmination of a lot of hard work, a lot of great collaboration with town staff, with HSH, in what will be presented to you this evening. What I'm going to tell you about tonight is part of what's in our document, and some of what our document is, and some of what it also is not, which is very important. We have, as a firm, extensive knowledge in projects in New Hampshire, as well as staff, individual experience throughout New England and New Hampshire. When I talk about the traffic numbers, I also experience the traffic numbers, with my home being only about 5 miles away from the project site. So when I go through the analysis, I do it with a sense of real-world knowledge of what happens on a daily basis. As we look to the master plan traffic impact assessment that's been completed, filed with the town, you have the briefing document that outlines the major characteristics of the study, and there's many pieces that we'll go through tonight, important pieces that look towards the likely traffic scenario that will be in place following the development of the PUD. It has been, as part of any other study, it's important to understand the mission, to understand the charge of what's been requested as it complements what's in the ordinance. You know, the ordinance points to, for the PUD, the need to assess the potential trip generation, the potential for distribution of traffic from the site, and an idea of what the mitigation may be. That can be interpreted in different ways, but the important part is that subsequent to the filing of the application, we've gone to great detail. And part of that is understanding the study area, understanding key assumptions, vetting those with staff and with HSH as we prepare a very comprehensive document to look at that 20-year horizon and what traffic will be like. One important thing to understand is that as we evaluate that future traffic scenario, it is what is based on the exemplar, or TND 3A, which is what we believe is the most likely development scenario with the distribution of uses east and west, north and south, as we look towards the build-out of the site. The key assumptions as far as how we're applying background growth of traffic, how we're assessing the potential of traffic from the site is all part of the mix. What's in front of you now on the board is the graphical depiction of the study area locations. This was built off input from staff and with HSH at a meeting in early December. Quite a bit of this data we already had, but it was complemented with other locations to make sure that we had a complete picture for what was going to be analyzed within the report. On the next slide, and also within your packets, is a simple list of all of those 15 intersections that are within and around the periphery of the PUD to give a sense of what the likely impacts are going to be. When we look at the key assumptions, I already mentioned that it is based on the exemplar scenario of land uses, which is within the maximas that is afforded in each of the zones, but it also is what we believe to be the most accurate depiction that we're projecting for the distribution of uses around the site. We've looked at a 20-year horizon, which is significantly more than what would normally be done for a traffic study that would be done for, say, site plan review with the town. But it's necessary because of the long-term build-out of the project. In consultation with town staff, there was a request to look at a continued background growth of traffic along the Route 102 corridor of 1% per year. The historic data shows us that it's less than 0.5% per year, so there's a good deal of conservatism there. On the other area roadways in and around the PUD, we've assumed 0.5% per year growth, which is reasonable and still more than we've seen based on historic data. We've also made the assumptions about the great work that's going to be accomplished by DOT within that 20-year horizon for improvements to Exit 4, for the mainline widening of I-93, and the introduction and construction of Exit 4A, as that is integral to the development on the east side. When we look towards that future scenario, we're also looking at utilizing that capacity that may exist at those intersections, because we're looking so far out that we're not building in excessive reserve capacity, which would mean unnecessary widenings when we're looking at a 20-year horizon. Up on the screen in front of you at the top, there's a table that shows how we've stratified the different uses around the site. It's separated with the first column describing the type of use: residential, hospital, hotel, commercial office, and the retail or shopping opportunities. On the west side, you'll see that it's very well loaded with traffic associated with the density of residential, with over 1,000 units allocated to the west side and 350 on the east side. The total density that's being proposed is shown on the far right as the total, and that is consistent with all the different maximas, overall maximas for the PUD that has been presented to date. When you look at that distribution of uses through the PUD, the bottom table shows you what the raw generation of traffic would be, and that is without any sort of credits, but when you itemize the individual uses and then you add them together, you see weekday daily, weekday morning, and weekday evening trip characteristics. Now, on the far right, you can see the totals of a variation between 3,000 and 5,700 vehicle trips per day. But that is just a raw number of trips that may be both internal and external to the project. You may have heard the discussion about internal capture of traffic at prior meetings through whether it was the charrette process or prior discussions with the planning board specific to the application. It's very important because when you have the various uses, mixed-use nature, you have the synergy of people that want to go to the site for various reasons, multiple reasons, and they don't all kick out individual trips off the site onto 102, onto Pillsbury, or onto 93. So that shared trip credit, or the folks that are living within the project and stay within the project to do a shopping trip or an office trip, whatever it may be, those come off of that total. Now, based on ITE methodology, we've done a series of calculations, and there have been other project correspondences that have pointed to the fact that we're going to be in the mid-30s, 30%, 35% for internal capture of traffic that never leaves the boundaries of the PUD. HSH recommended a lower internal capture rate of 23%, and that is more likely to occur in the opening years as the project starts to build out and we don't necessarily have the density in all the different areas. But when we look at the ultimate horizon, that 20-year horizon with full build-out, that is a conservative assumption, because what that means is if we go to 23%, it means that more of our traffic spills off-site. So what's presented within our study is very conservative. We have very high background growth rates. We have a conservative internal capture rate. So as we look towards the results, which I'll show you in a few minutes, we're still obtaining reasonable levels of service given the conservatism of all these different assumptions. Now, rather than show you some of the graphics first, what I want to do is give you a snapshot of the different levels of service. And I tried to keep it on the overall intersection basis so you could see in one table how it relates both under existing conditions, the no-build conditions, which would be the reoccupancy of the vacant market space near Market Basket. It would be that background 1% per year along 102 in the second column. The third column to the right is the build situation when we add on all the traffic from the PUD, and that you can see compromised levels of service. You see a number of level service Fs as you go down that list, and why is that? Well, that would be adding traffic with no improvements. The final column on the right is the improved situation. So we have the site-generated traffic, And we have a series of improvement measures and mitigation measures that are necessary to reel that delay back in and provide reasonable levels of service. When you go down that list, there are only a couple level service Fs, and they're really there because we are an F situation currently, or in the future, we're actually making it better. So we're reducing the delay, but yet it still shows up as a level service F just because it happened to just exceed a threshold. The examples of that are really at unsignalized locations where you may have some delay coming off a side street onto a main road or a collector road. One example there is actually just over the border into Derry, Ash Street Extension and North High Street. For those of you like me that travel that road often, you get to the end, on the easterly end, where you get to the stop sign, and at the peak hours, you can wait for a long period of time behind, 10, 12 cars at the evening peak hour for those heading over towards Crystal Ave or elsewhere in Derry. One of the recommended measures there is what really should be there today, which is an always stop, because it would warrant it today, and it gives that balance of opportunities for people to enter the intersection without having to wait for a gap.
Excuse
Are
me,
the
Kevin.
letters-
I think you better explain level of service.
Yeah, the letters, is that like a qualitative measurement?
It's really an assessment of delay, and it's different for unsignalized intersections and signalized intersections. A through E is essentially at capacity in all different movements. Level service F, in the case of a signalized intersection, would be any particular movement that would be over 80 seconds of delay, or just over a minute of delay. And that's not difficult to do. So it's a somewhat harsh test, but as traffic engineers, it's what we live with as the measure of delay. Beyond that 80 seconds, it still stays level service F, and you could have a low delay level service F or a high delay. But what's presented here is a summary table, really to show you that we've brought the conditions back to or improved upon the situation without the PUD. So what I'll do is I'll walk through what it means for physical improvements that are projected at this point and conceptualized that get us to the point of having that improved situation.
So basically, a level of service A is a shorter delay at that intersection versus a level of service F.
So could I say an A is 10-second wait and a B is a 20-second wait? I mean, do you have
Yes,
numbers,
yes.
hard numbers like that?
Yep, and
Could-
those
could
are
we
all
get-
within the study, and,
I didn't see anything in there, so.
oh, I'm sorry, not in the briefing document.
Show them the study, Kevin.
The
Yep.
study is
And-
like this thick.
Okay, I'd love
Yeah.
to see that, the numbers though, if we could get them.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, and within that document, there are also expanded tables that do it by movement rather than the overall intersection.
And F doesn't necessarily mean that it fails.
And thank you for saying that.
Well,
That is
I'm
a
not,
very common perception that F means failure, but it really is only a measure of delay.
So that's the 80-second delay is F.
Exactly. And, it's called F if it's 80 or if it's 880.
Well, but a clarification, though, on one of your previous slides, you said you're looking for a service level of E or better, correct?
For the improvements, the major intersections, primarily focusing on the signalized intersections.
Okay.
But the only cases where we show F in this table are associated with side street measures where they're actually being improved upon over the no-build situation. So we're looking to make or implement measures that will improve the delay overall, but they,
Relative to what it is today.
relative to what it is today.
Well, the future, even with new uses in Woodmont Commons, would be an improvement
That's correct.
under any scenario.
And as we walk through some of the concepts, you may see based on some movements that are delayed today, where if you add a lane in a particular location, that you could see how it would be improved.
so can we just look at, for example, Pillsbury Road Northwest Main Drive, which is proposed
Yes.
and has double asterisk. It says CF. So if you were to make that all-way stop, would that mean that, that F would go away in the evening?
That's correct. Actually, there is an asterisk there that didn't make it on this table, but it is, should be within the briefing document, where that particular intersection is in the heart of the PUD along Pillsbury Road. and I'll show it graphically to you in a moment. The concept that's been prepared shows offset intersections, for the north-south roads that go through the PUD, to try to create that plaza or that green space, the common area in the middle. In the event that those are that's an unsignalized intersection, offset, and it has a stop sign, it would be level service C in the morning with the full development and level service F in the evening peak hour. It doesn't mean it's at failure, like you said, it just means that it has a higher level of delay because it's at a stop sign. The row below that, Pillsbury Road and Orchard Drive as proposed, assumes a four-way intersection of that same movement, but controlled by a signal, and you can see how it improves drastically.
Excuse me, do you mind just for all of us, what are the various asterisks and what do they signify? We're looking
Certainly.
and we just can't
Yeah,
seem
we-
to locate them.
Page 26 of the briefing.
2-6?
The singular asterisks up top, the third line down, Garden Lane, Londonderry Commons, and Orchard Drive. It assumes the relocation of Garden Lane to increase the distance, and some of this will be put in better perspective when I show you the graphic in a moment. The double asterisks, two-thirds of the way down for the Northwest Drive, it says level service C or better if assumed as part of that signal in the heart of the PUD. Right in the middle of the project where Pillsbury crosses Orchard Drive and that northwest main driveway. And finally, the third asterisk, really for that intersection I already described at Ash Street and North High Street, where although it's described as F, it's actually better than the no-build situation. So we're improving upon it, and even though it may be called level service F, it's at a stop sign, but the delays are better than under current situation. Up on the screen right now, what we've done is a series of graphical depictions of the improvements to show what the lane use needs are likely to be based on that full development.
Yeah.
And the important thing to understand is, as we walk through the document, is that this is an idea or an example of what could be done to improve that level service. It is not the final solution, but is something that, to us, makes logical sense. Many of these items that you'll see in here along 102 are part of prior corridor studies that have been done by Southern New Hampshire or the town. Primarily as you get to the upper and the central corridor sections, pointing towards capacity improvements. So some of these may be done as participatory projects, others may be strict mitigation. But ultimately, the important thing to keep in mind is that when you review this document, this is not the last time a traffic study will be done. This is a test from a zoning level of what it is likely to result in for needs. So likely impacts and also corresponding likely needs for mitigation that will have the opportunity to be continually tested between the applicant and the planning board in future submittals for a site plan, for area plans and site plans that will test against this master plan document and refine the assumptions, refine the data if the data is getting older, and present those studies that are the comparison or the test to reckon against what was originally presented.
This would be the standard, so to speak.
Exactly. And I think that that's one thing that as we look towards the process in front of us, and Mr. Cecil described it a few minutes ago, is that building upon the presentation tonight and the work that's been done, and I think that if you were to look towards staff or to HSH, the amount of analysis that has been done is wonderful, but apart from this, it's necessary to also identify the regulatory scene for traffic as it relates to land use, so that we can come up with measures, the tests, the thresholds for when an updated study would be necessary as part of the site plan review. But apart from that, how are we measuring against the assumptions that were made in this document? What level of flexibility is there from a traffic standpoint? and what pieces of infrastructure are necessary to have implemented in order to realize the full development capability of the PUD. So, as I lead you through these concepts, this is a concept. There may be other different or better solutions, but this is something that shows us that there is a feasible means of alleviating delays and bringing it back to an improved situation. Here on 102, Garden Lane and Gilcrest, the likely needs are the introduction of turn lanes in various locations, primarily on the side streets. Gilcrest Road, you have traffic that operates in what they call split phased. One half of Gilcrest Road goes, and then it goes to red. The other half of Gilcrest Road goes, and then they stop. With that operation, we need additional lanes in order to bring those delays back to close to existing conditions. Going eastbound, there's a swath of pavement today in front of McDonald's, in front of the gas station, where there's actually enough room to just about fit a second turn lane in there today. And if you were to drive out to Gilcrest Road just north of the site, so looking at, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to get that laser pointer in your eye, but as you go eastbound on 102 and turn onto Gilcrest going northbound, there's a significant expanse of pavement as that receiving area where there really isn't a challenge for getting two left turn lanes going eastbound. Now that entering traffic headed towards the PUD, that's an easy fix. The side street improvements may be something that we have to work with the town and the state on, as participating for that overall improvement for anything that involves right-of-way. Similarly, at Garden Lane, today you have Wendy's, Londonderry Commons, and you have this 3 out of 4 way stop here with access to the park and ride. Looking at the potential to eliminate some of those turning movements at that intersection, and I think you might all agree that spacing those intersections out makes a lot of sense for those that we have the ability to move. And you'll see dotted in white above the potential for a new driveway connection, which provides more than double the spacing between the major conflict points along that roadway, while still maintaining great access and efficient egress to not only this portion of the PUD, but adjacent sites and the park and ride facility.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Being you're right at that point, because that's my concern, was what you just talked about. The intersection where Wendy's is now, where you pointed to, where you have the green where the potential Garden Lane access modification is, that intersection that we have now with the three-way, you said three-way stop is...
3 out of 4 way.
Yeah, 3 out of 4 way. All right, so that's a very busy intersection now. So what, you just said that you were proposing, if you were to put in that new road, the potential new road where the white is...
Yep.
The connection, which I always wondered one day, would that ever happen? So that's, to me, that's great. What modification would you do with the existing intersection that's very busy now by the Wendy's?
It would really keep access open to Londonderry Commons, but restrict access to the easterly half of the road. So it would be more or less entrance only. So with the movements coming out of the park and ride facility in the evening, say,
Yeah,
for all the mass exodus of those vehicles, that would no longer occur at the stop sign. They would circulate to the north and access Garden Lane / Orchard Drive at a signalized location instead. So most of that conflict of traffic would be removed from that intersection.
okay. So the intersection would stay the same, but because you would be adding roads and changing the path of, like, the park and ride, because you're giving more access roads, you're hoping that that intersection frees up a bit, is basically what you're saying.
Correct. And with the flow of traffic to and from the north, currently when you come out of the plaza and you get to the stop sign, that would be eliminated. So it'd be free flow north and south.
Okay,
Stop sign still on the Londonderry Commons side street.
okay, so that would be the change
That's
in that particular, okay, that's what I want to know, thank you.
But see, people would still be taking left turns out of Londonderry Commons to go up to, say, Market Basket.
Yes, that would still be permissible, but you'll see the other potential connection, and this is something that we show as a master plan, because really that's what we should be doing, is looking at another potential connection to the north on the west side of that road, where that opens up another
Right.
outlet for that whole
Yeah.
side of
Because I go through there every day, so the fact that you have the white, that you're opening up and you're getting through to Orchard Drive, through the condo complex there, continuing that road, basically, right? To me, that makes a lot of sense. It would free up that intersection greatly.
Yeah, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't do it myself, coming around the backs of the buildings, and
Right.
it's, you know, rather than enter onto 102, and that's part of what we do as the planning, is to make sure that we have those sensible internal connections, not only within our project,
Right.
but the things that might make sense to our butters to
Right.
consider as well.
I think that's
Mr.
great.
Chairman?
You have to come up to a microphone, please.
Just so that, Mike Kettenbach for the record, just so that everybody knows, when the center was originally built and the condos were built on the west side, there originally was a lane where that dotted line is, and then the condo association closed it off. So I just, you know, there was that thought process even 20 years ago
There's a
to
condo
maintain
office
that.
complex
But
back
there
here.
wasn't an easement granted at the time.
Back here.
But that original connection was there 20 years ago, and it was closed off about 5 or 6 years after it was put in.
Yeah, I can remember when
Okay.
it was there, because
Yeah.
it was
I had
much
heard
easier
that.
getting in and out of the
Potholes. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Chris?
Following on from Mr. Kettenbach's comment there, because I was going to recall that probably somewhere underneath the grass there is some pavement left, you're proposing a signalized intersection there then, so there'll be a set of lights to control that traffic.
That's
That's
correct.
what the
And-
little
and-
S means.
And that section of, you know, for lack of a better term, Orchard Drive, that would traverse through a portion of the existing Market Basket building and then head up into the orchard, that's envisioned to be wide enough with a landscape median, yet 5 lanes in other sections, because it's the primary entrance.
Into the rest of the complex, yeah.
That's correct.
The other question I have is, have you talked with the Londonderry Commons folks, because they were in, not too long ago, showing a report of the traffic that currently goes through there right now, and their concern about that, so I presume you've talked with them?
We haven't spoken to them yet, because we're not at a stage where we're designing anything. It's really the things that make sense to us for the future planning, not only for our sake, but for the planning board as well, independent of this PUD, things to consider that will alleviate current challenges as well.
I'd say maybe you want to start having some discussions with them now, because if they're
Certainly.
still strongly opposed to it, as they were before, that would really throw out, and I like this design much better than what's there today. It's a nightmare getting in there right now.
Yeah, and really our challenge is to make sure that we can, at steps in the process, identify the mitigation measures and the improvement measures that are necessary, so we don't overburden the infrastructure that's there. And this is one of those key gateway features that would likely happen early in the process to make sure that traffic can efficiently and safely get in and out of the PUD.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. The green that right now goes into Wendy's,
Yes.
and are you saying that's going to be an entrance only?
That's our current concept for, in order to limit some impacts there, because they could still circulate around to the north to get back. There's a difference in grade there as you go from that portion of Garden Lane just to the north. It rises by maybe 12 feet to the detention basin. So there are limited options to reconfigure it in its current location, given the topography. So as far as recirculating, that would be an option, like I described before, to solve the current and the future traffic challenge.
So would they have to go up and then around over to where the light is in order to get out of Wendy's?
Or there's a potential modification to have the current entrance be right in, right out onto Orchard Drive, right in this location here, so that they could still circulate right in, right out.
Right, they still come out right and go
Right.
right.
So,
So, question, so you're,
Y'all need to be talking to Wendy's too.
oh, absolutely, and
Yeah.
this is,
and the
Big
bus.
time.
this is a vision, this is something that, this is not the end-all solution, but our charge is to show that there are potential solutions that,
Yeah.
that can work.
So question that I have then is the white lines are, to me, a lot of ifs, right? So if if Londonderry Commons wants to do this, and, you know, if we want to put a road in there and so forth, and to me, wouldn't it have been a little more logical to draw the white lines and then maybe shift the signal down to where the existing intersection is? And still allow, because you have inbound, outbound traffic for Wendy's, you have an auto parts store up there, you have a car wash, you have, I believe there's also a daycare up there.
But there's not enough space between the intersection and,
There isn't the space there, 'cause detention basin.
you wouldn't be able to have a light there, it's too close to the light.
We can certainly evaluate as we get further in the process.
You would be able to have
Our-
a light right there, and we
The
would still be
intent
able
was to
do
really
all
show
those
that there are
things.
There
options.
isn't room for the width to make it. to
You're right,
accommodate.
and that may, again, for the record, I'm Jim D'Angelo, I'm with TEC, and Kevin and Rebecca and HSH have been working together to meet the intent of the bylaw, which, you know, we have an obligation to demonstrate that we generate so much traffic, we impact your roadway system to a certain extent, and we have to show certain improvements that could possibly mitigate that impact. Now, what's shown is possible mitigation. And if that mitigation is not available to us, you're right, we could slide down. Is it a preferred one? No, now we've got tight spacing between two signalized intersections, and we're gonna have a heck of a time coordinating those two locations to get adequate level of service. So what Kevin has shown is, let's try to get more spacing in there, try to reduce the conflicts of somebody impacting at mid-block and get some separation there. But again, these are intended to be shown as potential solutions, just like, well, geez, we have to talk with Wendy's, we'll have to talk with the Common. But that would be if the zone change takes place, when we file our specific site plan approval and we do a traffic impact study at that time for the phase that'll be coming on, and then we'll have to deal with the reality then, the real numbers and the real constraints, and the real solutions that have to be put in place. This is to demonstrate that there are possible solutions and that we have solutions to mitigate our impact at 20-year full build.
Thank you.
And although we think we're very smart, we also know that there are other great ideas out there that we would be happy to consider. But this is really just a baseline, a roadmap of really some of the potential options. As we go further to the east, Route 102 and Londonderry Road, this has been the subject of the corridor studies for, dare say, decades. It's been envisioned by Southern New Hampshire and the town as needing improvements for a long time. As the westerly gateway to downtown Derry, and having driven it very often, as you go eastbound, you get about a 6-foot wide left turn lane to head onto Londonderry Road today, right in this location in front of the gas station, where it's half a lane. It's just enough so that you can feel very uncomfortable trying to make that left turn. But there is a need today. It has that independent utility, independent of the PUD, where improvements need to occur. What I've conceptualized in front of you is what needs to be there, both without and with the PUD. Most likely a 5-lane section that looks at 2 through lanes and a left turn lane in each direction. St. Charles to the south here is a dead end, so it has very little traffic and thus a very short left turn lane going westbound. But with the east side of the PUD, just north of there, separating out a longer right turn lane as you come south along Londonderry Road and seek to turn right to head back towards exit 4. Just what is likely to occur for long-range needs. The upper corridor study for 102 actually said 4 to 6 lanes wide. So it dovetails, and that document, somewhere in my files, is an older document, so even at that time it was pointing to that greater need. When we look at just outside here at Mammoth and Pillsbury, there are some challenges today with longer queues depending on what time of day you come through. And long-term, the need for additional turn lanes. I know that there have been concepts and plans in the past of varying degrees of widening proposed by DOT and jointly by the town. And again, this is a representation of the widening along Mammoth Road southbound to get a right turn lane in, and turn lanes on Pillsbury westbound. Here's where it gets interesting. Pillsbury Road at Hardy and Gilchrist. Today, if you go north on Gilchrist Road, as you're trying to come back from work or come back from shopping, sometimes you can hit it and it's only 6 cars deep, other times it's 20 cars deep. There is a need today for improvement. There have been a couple different concepts or ideas that have been thrown out as far as how to improve the intersections. We have the always stop here right behind the chairman, where it's shown as a potential cul-de-sac, where it's a stop control on all 3 approaches. And to the north, where it meets Hardy, you have the 2 out of 3-way stop, which it mirrors and is equally attractive as the Garden Lane entrance. The need to improve that is evident today, and it's something that we have ideas for how it fits with the PUD. There's the control of land to the east, but we have to be cognizant of the potential for impacts and make sure that we have some reality to what's presented. And what we've proposed conceptually is a through connection of Pillsbury that gets rid of the crisscross or zigzag movement of Pillsbury Road, creates 2 nicely identified T intersections or 4-way intersections that look normal and customary as far as traffic control. The benefit of that for our butters to the west is that rather than have thousands of cars of traffic per day going by their front door, it creates a small section of cul-de-sac while still retaining all the frontage and actually returning some of that paved area to green space or grassed area. Again, this is an idea for how to access this portion of the PUD and also similarly mitigating traffic impacts.
So I guess I like this,
Yeah.
number one, but I'm not sure how those people get to their houses that are on that road. How do the people that are on the road right now get to their houses? Are you making really
Oh.
long driveways to the new road, or?
Oh, no, the road would stay as is through this section here.
It stays, it just doesn't get traffic.
And it would be the 4th leg at Hardy and Pillsbury. So the cul-de-sac would just come off of,
Oh, so it would stop there?
it would stop there. So there
Yeah,
would still
I
be
get it.
access to Pillsbury Road without having long driveways.
And the through traffic would go away.
Yep.
Be
You're
displaced
taking the
to be a lot further
busyness
away.
away from that portion of
right.
the road.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Still have access, but the busyness away.
Now,
And better functioning intersections.
Right.
there's some obvious regrading that would have to occur on the east side of the Hardy-Pillsbury intersection, but that could be sloped back. There could be some retaining walls, a combination of things that allow for a very feasible connection east-west that avoids those 2 unique intersections. As we go further to the east along Pillsbury Road, the first intersection, a major intersection you'd come to is the one that we described before when we were talking about level service, that Orchard Road and that primary northwest quadrant access point, the collector road. That is such where at full build-out is likely to meet signal warrants, and that is depicted as that aligned roadway. There is the opportunity still for having them be offset if there was a desire to control that cross-traffic, whether speed or volume of traffic that goes north-south through there. It remains a viable option, and apart from traffic signals, this, as the program develops over time, we may find that that becomes a 2-way stop control or an all-way stop control until such time as the signal warrants are actually met to put in that higher level of traffic control. We've depicted some other potential, what we're calling conceptual PUD street locations. That's really just to show that there would be a series of access points into the PUD on the south side as we go further to the east. As we approach I-93, just beyond Hovey Road, that intersection is expected to stay similar in its nature. With what's been conceptualized, we hold that north side of the road and we widen towards the site because we control that portion. We've had a series of discussions and a recent meeting with New Hampshire DOT about the general status of their development, their construction project to widen I-93 main line, but also details about where they're at in the design development process for the Ash Street Bridge. That is currently proposed to be just off the existing alignment to the north. It's not depicted here, but they're planning on a 2-lane bridge as part of their current design, which is at about 50% complete. We met with them and with town staff and HSH to make sure that we could collectively understand the status of the project, the flexibility, and I had another follow-up discussion with a DOT representative this morning, just to better understand the level of flexibility that exists should we need that 3rd lane going eastbound. Because just on the east side of the highway, where Pillsbury or Ash Street meets Londonderry Road, that's currently envisioned to be a 4-way intersection with our east side main driveway. With that influx of traffic and the development on the east side, even if 4A is constructed, that would require improvements and quite possibly an extra lane on the bridge. So keeping that flexibility open, that is one alternative. As we look towards other potential variations of that, whether it be a potential roundabout that location that would not require bridge widening, or the potential to shift that easterly access point to a location that could have that left turn developed further to the east. All of those remain valid, feasible, but it's something that will come into focus in subsequent studies as we test that capacity on the east side. This is one of the key assumptions that we've included as part of that full build-out of the PUD. But again, based on one mitigation option, a 3rd lane on the bridge. But those other options we would continue to consider and to test. That with exit 4A, the implementation of 4A is critical for realizing the full development potential on the east side. So why is that important to us and why is it important to the planning board? Well, it's really a very logical way of looking at that phased implementation of the project. It would be premature spending of potential mitigation dollars if we loaded up the whole west side with the development and had to mitigate all the impacts to head down to exit 4 without 4A if that was a pending project. You know, if it's in the imminent horizon and it's been planned for years, it has the support of the 2 towns, and it's in its final EI stage. Although the funding hasn't been allocated yet, there's great consensus, and the I-93 work is being planned and designed so that it's ready to go once that funding is allocated. Now, is that next year? Is that 3 or 4 years from now? Probably not, but it's certainly going to be within that 20-year horizon because we're looking so far out. But when I talked about the thresholds, when I talk about the potential regulatory options for the planning board to discuss with the team and to frame out, that's necessary from a control standpoint for the planning board, but it's also very logical means for us to look towards that great infrastructure that we look forward to having. Because what that means is that we don't have to spend extra money in trying to mitigate traffic towards exit 4. So as far as the sensitivity analysis goes of, well, what if we did not have exit 4A? What if we didn't have the 3rd lane on the bridge? It's really self-regulating because, you know, our client, the developer, we want that infrastructure so that people can efficiently and safely get into the site. But on the flip side, we also don't want to spend more money in mitigation trying to fix a solution that is going to be very short-sighted, when if we just wait a couple more years and we have the benefits of 4A, then it mitigates a lot of the impacts from that east side. The intersection that I described as being level service F, one of the movements that is expected to stay but at a much better delay is at Ash Street Extension and North High Street, really creating enough room to have separate left and right turn lanes and making it an all-way stop control instead of a 2-way stop control.
Who do we have to talk to get that done now? That's Derry, though.
Derry.
This is the Derry spot.
Yeah.
Look at me.
Easy fix, high benefit. Just a graphic, it's the same results as you saw before, but just graphically depicting the results of the difference between future year without the project and the future year with the project and improvements for how we're reining that delay back in and providing comparable levels of service. But that also is provided in your packet. There's been a wealth of information tonight, as far as this introductory presentation, but I want to just revisit in summary some important things to keep in mind. The purpose of this document, as we understood it with the charge and our great collaboration with staff and with HSH, was to understand those potential global impacts of the traffic in that 20-year horizon. We do have conservative inputs that are reflected in the study. It contemplates the full development of the east side as part of the implementation of 4A. It has those other assumptions as far as the DOT's infrastructure being in place at Exit 4 and Ash Street. We look at that broad 20-year horizon, so there's a great forward-looking assessment of what the impacts and the mitigation need to be. But this is not the last study, and this is not the last time the board has a decision to make about traffic, because we have a charge as a development team to come back and compare against this document to look at how we can determine those thresholds and the regulations about how we can get as close to this as possible and with what flexibility. And that is still in front of us, and that we'll be wrapping that into the work that Cecil Group is working with our whole team on, that will be presenting to staff, to HSH, and to the board in subsequent meetings. We look forward to those discussions.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Anything to?
Well, I think, no, that really concludes the transportation component. What we thought we'd do is just quickly go through the open space is much less detailed in a sense, but maybe we'll just cover those points quickly, and then we'll be ready for any kinds of questions or comments.
Okay, you don't think open space will take, well, I'm sure it won't take anywhere near the length of time,
No.
because this is a lot of transportation.
This was the big, to use the term, the big Hummer, and I'm not referring to a vehicle type. This was the big focus, but we think it'd be good to, as we're keeping different topics going, and Jeff Wilson, who's part of our, is going to assist me, and if there are particular questions, to talk about the open space approach. What we're going to do is talk about the basic approach to open space and how we're considering it. The open space is an extremely important part of the Woodland Commons development concept and its future. It's really important to think through the different types of open space and then how to set standards for that. Unlike the development standards where there are a whole series of maximum developments, with open space, this is about minimum standards and minimum approaches, recognizing that much of Woodmont Commons today is open space. So we have an open space reduction program rather than an open space creation program that makes sure that we don't reduce it too much and it's the right kind of space in the right places. So the plan distinguishes between a series of shared open spaces and the shared open spaces are those that would be perhaps owned in common, would be available. Some of them would be accessible and some not, depending upon the type of open space. If it's a wetland, for example, it's protected and it's not consistent with the flora and fauna, it would still be a shared asset. It's just not one that you can go into necessarily. So there's conserved open space, which should be thought about as, in a sense, that kind of natural open space. Circulation open space, the kinds of green spaces along the edge of the streets and the boulevards. Passive open space, think about that as park-like, where you may be able to go and throw a frisbee, but not like active open space where there might actually be a ball field or an organized activity. Civic open space is meant to be those kinds of plazas and spaces where people can gather that are complementary to the traditional neighborhoods. Buffers, and you have lots of buffers that you deal with. We've incorporated buffers specifically around the key edges of the PUD so that where incompatible uses might crop up, we've got a 50-foot buffer as part of what happens. Now, these spaces that I've just described, public access would be available to virtually all of them, with the exception of being buffers, which might be on private property, but as a setback and a large landscaped area to make sure that the pieces are set back. So those are established, but might be individually owned. The other kinds of open spaces we're talking about would either be along the streets, the roads, or commonly used areas. Project open space, there's another layer of open space, which is when you have an individual lot and individual project. Many of those, for example, parking lots are going to have landscaping within them, or there will be front yards in front of many of these buildings. That open space we are going to be addressing in the rules and regulations for individual projects. And finally, there's the category of agricultural open space. That's what's out there, a lot of it today, and we want to make sure that there are opportunities for agricultural open space in the future. So if there's a community garden, that may be very well what that is. So those are the categories that we're talking about. And the overall idea is to make sure that there is a series of connected, we have an ecological approach to the open space where we are trying to leverage the water drainage and the agricultural impoundments, which is a term that Jeff's helped me understand. What I think is a pond turns out to be an impoundment. But I think those are places that the links for both wildlife and for people walking and bicycling along are going to be very important. As you look through your briefing package, you'll notice that the idea is that between the infrastructure open space, the paths, and the conserved open space, that there is a network of places that are all connected. And we have this very interesting rule that we're proposing. While we know where a number of the open space resources will be and where the buffers will be, a lot of the pieces could vary along with the development patterns and the time. But we're proposing a rule that no matter where you are in the future, you can walk out the front door and within a quarter mile, within 1,200 feet, you have to have access to at least a half an acre of qualifying open space. And there's just no place that doesn't have that kind of open space within easy walking distance. And all of these open spaces are to be connected by streets and roads. And if you think about that, you start to realize that's a really interesting way of making sure that walkability in connected open space occurs, even though there are a lot of variations in how you create it. The chart that we have provided in the briefing document has a series of allocations of open space in a number of different categories. Some of these are the shared open spaces that we've talked about. Some of them are conserved open spaces, and some of them are buffers. So shared spaces like civic spaces or passive recreation or active recreation vary according to the type of sub-area that we are using in the land use designations. The total amounts to, just for these categories, 143 acres, or close to 25% of the land itself set up for these kinds of open spaces. And that doesn't include the open space that will be along the streets and the roads, and it doesn't include the open space that will be in lots. So this really kind of establishes, unlike the maximum of development, it's the minimum of open space. So with that, and we'll be here to answer questions about it, just two final closing comments. We've started to build a glossary of terms because as planners and specialists, there are terms that we start to use that are very helpful. So we're building up a set of definitions, and we've put those in your package. Things when we talk about an area, when we talk about the land use plan, what's this master developer about? What's a TND? When we have a company that's a TND, and then we have traditional neighborhoods, very simple things that are easy to get confused about are in there. Now, this is different from the formal legal definitions that will be part of the master plan that go to land use and some of these other categories. We'll be providing that to you in the future. These are the kinds of things that when we're talking among ourselves, we think are just helpful. The last note that, in responding to the comment that Cynthia had made at the beginning of the session here, in terms of coming up with a good way to answer the questions, we realized that there are different kinds of questions, and we were sort of trying to figure out a better way of making sure that we respond clearly. So we've come up with a basic system of, think of it as a series of boxes. Some of the questions are questions that the developer needs to respond to, questions of information. Some of the questions are actually legal and procedural questions that need legal background. Some of the questions are the kinds of questions that need to be directed to your peer review consultants to respond to, and some of them are opinions, actually. So what we've done is we're just classifying the questions so that we're getting the right response from the right people in an organized way. And I think that will be helpful in your review. So that will be forthcoming in the future. And so with that, we've covered all the topics that we wanted to get to and summarize the briefing and ready for discussion.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to staff and Ted also to, for their input on this. We'll go to the board for questions and answers, then we'll go to the public for questions and answers. So, John, Cynthia?
Just to help, again, with Kevin's discussion about traffic, again, just so you understand what they did. Again, they had looked at what the full build-out of Woodmont Commons, what the traffic would be generated out there. They made some assumptions as far as background growth, assumptions that 4A happens, the 93, or the Ash Street Bridge widening occurs. And then again, if you recall those intersections that they've shown, the one in particular that I want to bring your attention to, because everybody knows it, is Pillsbury and Mammoth Road. Again, there's a new left turn lane, straight through, heading eastbound, or excuse me, westbound. So again, these are conceptual plans that they're showing to alleviate the traffic congestion out there. They're not final, but again, just so that people understand, just so that hopefully the board will understand what TEC has done under, again, in sync with what HSA and the town has asked them to do. So, Jane Howard is a traffic engineer on the team. She works with Ted, so if there are any other questions regarding traffic, Jane's a lady to talk with.
Okay, do you have anything to add at the moment anyway, or?
I could add a little bit. In a way, with this development, and we work closely with the tech folks and the development team on the study, which I think has been well done in a short time. We had agreement on the assumptions, and we've worked hand in hand on some of the issues. Just giving an overview, in a way, the east side of 93 offers, with the introduction of interchange 4A, really offers the best opportunity for creating the high-density development, because it gives you a new interchange on that east side, which gets people in and out of that side of the development without having to travel on 102. On the west side of the development, the fact is that pretty much all of that development to get to I-93 will end up on Route 102, where there are capacity constraints today. And there is considerable mitigation that's proposed as part of the project, which, I would encourage you to look carefully at. Route 102 is a state route, so it's not within the town's control to implement those widenings and signal coordination, and so on. And then Pillsbury Road up on in the middle of the development, while an internal road as part of the PUD, as far as traffic to and from 93 is concerned, it also is a through road. And there's significant widenings there and signals that are proposed to accommodate the long-range traffic there. The good news is that with the conservative assumptions, those improvements do mitigate the impacts of some pretty dense development. I guess the question for the town is really, is that extent of mitigation acceptable? And bear in mind that the mitigation along Route 102 and Pillsbury Road, west of 93, still takes into account the fact that considerable development is on the east side. So it is a big package of development, and the mitigation is not insignificant. So it's just, as far as the big picture is concerned, that's what the board needs to really evaluate.
And again, the mitigation, as indicated in the report, is conceptual, and obviously it's all dependent on land acquisition and all that. So when you look at the figures and you say, wow, can they actually do that? Again, it's a conceptual, just so we're all on the same page.
At least it's a starting basis on how to handle, I think.
That's right, and I think from that point of view, and we worked hard with the development team to reach a starting point, and like Kevin said, this represents the most likely scenario and balance between the east and the west side. But, with that having been said, on the east side, you need 4A, you need some improvements to Pillsbury Road. Then on the west side, some pretty hefty mitigation along 102, Garden Lane, Pillsbury Road, and so on. So it's a good starting point to really understand the magnitude of everything and what would be necessary in the long run, for a full build-out, worst case scenario.
How about exit 4 itself? Because it's going to be putting a tremendous amount of additional, even though we're putting traffic on 102, which is going to be a tremendous amount, a lot of that traffic is going to use that interchange, and has...
Well, I think, and Kevin can speak to this, the improvements that are planned and programmed in the short term by New Hampshire DOT will improve the capacity at the interchange itself. I think that the issues really lie between that Gilchrist Road really, and the Orchard Drive and the southbound ramp, because your main exit from the development would be that Orchard Drive connection, and you're adding a good hunk of traffic to that link in the peak hours, and it requires new lanes on 102 to accommodate it in both directions. So that's kind of a critical point, and there's only 2 points where your traffic can enter and exit the site from 102, at Garden Lane, Orchard Drive, and at Gilchrist Road. So you can create an internal street network to accommodate that internal traffic, but at those external points, you still are going to be adding a lot of traffic, onto that main connection to 93, which is still where a lot of your traffic is going to want to go.
Is there any assumption that people will go down Pillsbury and down Londonderry and then get on 93 that way, as opposed to Garden Lane and?
There is, yes, and we've loaded that too, but in a proportional way that doesn't overburden the infrastructure or does not create unrealistic expectations for how traffic's going to distribute. But when you look at the arrangement of the PUD, if you're on the anywhere near Pillsbury, near where it becomes Ash at the bridge, it's a lot easier to take right turns to get back on the highway than it is to go back and take left turns through the project, left turn onto 102 to head back to exit 4. But to build upon what Jane said, we've modeled what DOT is planning for exit 4. The greatest improvement there is what you see all the time, where going eastbound on 102, trying to get on I-93 northbound, that singular left turn lane backs up forever. And the greatest improvement that they're doing as part of that project, and it's independent of the PUD, is adding the second left turn lane. The southbound off-ramp is never really a problem, just the way the ramps are aligned. And just behind you, I put back up that graphic for that westerly portion of 102, west side of the highway, where, just to build upon that conversation for the needs here, that there's the potential at full build-out that there would be 3 left turn lanes that would head onto this portion of 102. And the rightmost lane would turn right into that right turn lane onto the on-ramp. And that would require some widening on the south side of 102 there. But that is something that can mitigate that impact with that third left turn lane. A lot of the discussion about the flexibility, the sensitivity of how much can get loaded in that southwesterly quadrant is really self-controlled by this intersection, because it's not like we're going to put a 4th left turn lane at that location. So, we're somewhat maximized by the capacity of that third left turn lane heading onto 102 eastbound, and that is part of the formula for where the board has the control moving forward for the things that make sense as specific phases are proposed. The testing against what we've done to date, and the testing against those other regulations that we'll be putting together for the board's review, so that we don't end up with a situation that varies significantly from what's already presented. It tracks along that. And in reference to exit 4A, that is an assumption that is in place in the full build. And it is an important assumption because we all want to see it happen. It alleviates traffic regionally. It provides access to 28. It provides access to the development. It also provides access between the Pillsbury Road movements and those that would no longer have to go on Pillsbury to try to access 4, like I do many times. So having that infrastructure in place is necessary for the region. It's necessary for the development. And in the absence of that, we have a considerably scaled back east side portion of the development where we can't get ahead of ourselves as far as the infrastructure goes, that testing or that reckoning will occur when a specific proposal comes forward for that size. But it would be limited until such time as Exit 4A is implemented.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. When we started this conversation with Tech and HSH back in end of November, I mean, we've been doing this a while. And obviously the results, because of the time that we've had, have proven themselves. But one of the reasons why we talked about putting traffic first is because that is probably going to be the most limiting entity that we have here. And looking at what it would do overall, and Kevin alluded to it, if we moved a certain amount of traffic or a development to the west side, it's definitely going to impact what's going out on this roadway here. And then one question that I thought might be interesting to know is how much actual land taking or additional right-of-way are we looking at in each of these scenarios? Because that's something that we haven't had a chance to talk about.
No, we haven't, but it's something that there is physical room to put these measures in place without knowing the exact right-of-way lines. I worked on the Gilcrest Road design. In fact, I found the old plans in my basement about a month ago. From when I was with a former firm and had been part of that design team. There are reasonable and feasible means of making improvements happen, but in some cases, whether it be on state highway or on local streets, where we may need the participation of the town. And that's a measure that, when you go back to the independent utility or the independent need for some of these things to happen, regardless of the PUD. When you talk about Pillsbury and Gilcrest, I don't think anybody would say, that's a great situation today. We need to do something to fix it. Well, where there is a need today, and there's an opportunity to fix it with a great plan that can be phased over time, in elements of right-of-way, although they can become best efforts, we also don't want to be in a situation where we're held hostage for something that has that background benefit for the community. Jane alluded to the fact of jurisdiction too, that this is not a permitting document with DOT. This is a master plan traffic study. So this is, gives us a guide towards what may be necessary. But we have a lot of work to do when we get to that appropriate stage of the site plan, where we have a specific proposal and we're identifying mitigation, where beyond the board here, we have extensive amounts of permitting work to do with DOT. They have received courtesy copies of this, just so you know. 3 copies went up to Concord, to the Traffic Bureau, to Preliminary Design, and to the I-93 project manager. So they are aware of the study, and we want to make sure that it's an inclusive process, that it's a comprehensive process, but yet one that respects where we're at today and the application that's in front of the town, which is a master plan at a zoning level.
Anything else?
Oh, no, not right now, thank you.
Oh, okay. I'll go through the board, then go to the public. Start with Chris.
Okay. Go through my annotations here. Some of the questions have been addressed already, so it shouldn't be too long. In the briefing you gave us, you had up on the slides there a internal capture table, which isn't in the briefing with the internal trips. It would be nice to have that included in the briefing if we can get that in our content.
That's in the briefing.
It is.
That one?
No, not that one.
Internal capture.
It was an internal capture table.
That one,
We had the
I'm very sure.
yeah, we had the trip generation, but we didn't have the internal ones.
Yeah, that's in there.
I saw that too.
Trip generation characteristics 13? No?
13?
That's when you're in.
Yeah, on page 13.
That's external. We don't have the internal table. Yeah. That was one thing it'd be nice to have, just to be able to refer to. So regarding, I like the yeah, it's that page.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just so I understand the request, we have this same table is on page 13 of the briefing document.
Yeah.
Just describing that the net new trips that go external to the site. Are you requesting more information on the actual internal capture calculations, or?
Well, this one I think was primary trip, was this the, okay, so this is the same table. You were talking about internal capture. You didn't have tables and quantifications of the internal capture?
No, this is the resultant, this shows the net impact. so
Impact
that-
from the other table, okay,
They have
all
the
right.
total trips and then the external trips. So
Trips,
you take-
okay.
So one thing that's important to note about the internal trips, though, is that the
Page
trips
12.
between the east and the west, the internal trips have been assigned to Pillsbury Road, which is that main connection. And their study did do that appropriately, so.
So in terms of the, it's mainly focused on the traffic coming out of the development onto 102. I know Lynn's going to ask this question because I suspect there'll be a significant volume of traffic going up Gilcrest, particularly for commuters going to exit 5. If 4A doesn't occur, or even if 4A does occur and there isn't access from the western side. So have we done some studies of what that's going to do to Gilcrest Road going north up through town? Because I suspect that, that's going to be their shortcut to exit 5 is to go up there and up through Stonehenge.
Correct, and with that, that would require making the access to 102 as efficient as possible in absence of exit 4A. As you go north on Hardy and you hit Stonehenge, you take a right and head out towards 28, that would also be limiting in its capacity because there are significant delays today in trying to get onto 28 to make that an efficient cut-through.
They go up my road instead.
They go up Perfect.
Trips.
Yeah, and it's a known shortcut through town to get up to exit 5. It's just that I'd like to see some numbers of what that's going to increase up through there from, this will be a big residential area and it will have, a significant number of folks that probably will be, commute up to Manchester or Concord or somewhere like that. though I suspect the majority would be going south. But it would not, I think that's something that should be included, is to see what impact's going to be on Gilchrist, because Gilchrist is a windy, quiet little, road right now which has people speeding on it today. And, there's a lot of sharp corners on that road.
You mean Hardy, right? You're
Yeah,
talking about
Hardy,
right?
Gilchrist
Yeah.
onto Hardy.
Gilchrist going
Yeah.
into Hardy, he's
Yeah.
talking about,
That's where it is there, yeah. That's Hardy he's talking about.
why
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
two
I'm
names.
talking about Hardy.
Not Gilchrist, but
Yeah.
Hardy.
I knew what you meant.
Understanding that this is conceptual of the mitigation pieces that you've laid in here, will the final master plan include triggers that would indicate, say, at this point, in order to develop, for example, one of the areas in the TND plans, that if this particular intersection is at this capacity, then this mitigation, something needs to happen, whether it's what you've laid out here as conceptual or something has to be done. Are
Yes.
those going to be laid out, just as
Yes.
we would have for sewer, that, there needs to be a capacity in there for, water and sewer, for that to be development to take place, that these would have to occur at the
Yes.
same time?
Yes, exactly, and they'll be very specific. We've introduced, in fact, in I think our vocabulary, we talk about thresholds. There's certain circumstances, if the 4A interchange and the connector road aren't built, well, there's just, that's a threshold condition before you can do anything of any significance over in WC
On the
12.
other side, yeah.
And so that needs to be written in and understood. Now, certainly the planning and implementing the development and planning and implementing the roadway could happen at the same time, but you couldn't go ahead with the development and the entitlements. You don't have the entitlements to do that without that trigger. So think of the trigger as the word we're using, threshold, same thing. And then this process that is described, that we have a sort of baseline, but there are going to have to be a series of studies with each significant phase that tests what the reality is out there, and that a condition may very well be that these improvements have to happen. And that's a little bit about where the development agreement comes in, because in some cases, the town and the developer will have to work together. Some of it will be on the development land, some will be on the right-of-way, and everybody's got to agree to move ahead together when those conditions are met. So these will be very specific. We'll be presenting those to you when we work out the details.
Yeah, so for example, WC1, Garden Lane's got to get addressed. It's,
Yes.
that three-way and one no-stop is a disaster. And, I'm just amazed that we don't have the police called out there more frequently for, some sort of pile-up in that intersection.
That's right. Yeah.
So I presume that we would set into the master plan that has to be sorted before we can start.
Developing that area,
Developing out
that's
that
right.
area.
And if it's not, if it isn't, then the development the site plan gets denied. So it's really in the interest of the developer
Yeah, as long as
to solve it.
kind of gives us a regulation to be able to say,
Yes.
this is enabling that to
Yeah,
happen.
exactly. And the idea is, though, once that improvement is done, then it should open up that opportunity. So we're trying to set up a structure so that if someone's putting a small addition on the back of a store in Woodmont Common in the future, they don't have to do a transportation impact analysis for the entire thing. There's certain, once you make some of these improvements, you can keep going for a while, but the big phases, you really got to go back and check, and if those conditions aren't met, you don't get the entitlements, don't get to go.
So the other question I had following on from these types of improvements
Mm-hmm.
is, and I guess it's kind of a clarification for everybody, that some of this is state road, it's 102, some of it is town road, some of it is private, property that would have to be acquired in order to put some of these intersection changes. Some of it is your property already owned by the development. That this is conceptual, but these would have to happen, and they would probably have to be, I don't know how they get funded, but they may be state-funded projects that would have to happen.
That's right.
Just to clarify that it's not, something that's going to be necessarily paid for by the town or the developer or the state. It's something that's going to have to be determined, and if it'll be like putting in exit 4A, it'll have to get funded by someone.
Right, or there may be a case where there is a pro rata share for something that is part of a bigger fix, because the timing of all these improvements, you know, and when they fall, and I think one of your questions is, when do you need to do certain things? Well, part of that is which phase comes online first? Is it a portion in the northwest quadrant? Is it immediately behind the existing plaza in the orchard? Where that is specifically located, and that's why it's important to focus this more detailed discussion about the impacts when you get to the stage of doing that area plan with a specific proposal in a specific location with an updated study that says, based on this very specific proposal that fits in the framework of the PUD zoning, we have these specific impacts that we have to mitigate. Or we wait for certain elements to happen.
But, and that's why planning is so important. This is a heads up to the state, for example, that in order for Londonderry to move ahead and have this development, there has to be a lot of thinking and talk and funding of certain improvements. It is sort of like a chicken and egg question, which goes first. Well, but there are three parties here. But what we're trying to do is to make sure that the planning is thought about, that there are good potential solutions, and that that you're, as a town, in a position to say, we understand this is a little complicated, but the development doesn't go ahead until those get solved. We all understand that.
Yeah, so to make everybody clear, that we could be waiting on something from the state to say, yes, we're going to do this work, and we're all sitting here staring at the wall.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's right. But that's why you want to give everybody a heads up, be meeting as we have been with the state, in making sure that the kinds of improvements, and of course, this is what the states do, they make sure that the infrastructure is appropriate, and they work with towns and communities and development as well. So everybody's doing their job so far.
And one other example of how a traffic study may need to be done, you know, if you liken it to the subdivision process in the town, if you had a industrial subdivision that, you know, the developer X wants to go put in a road and have certain entitlements for X number of square feet in, you know, 8 buildings or 8 lots, and with that comes a mitigation package for that proposal.
We'll have off-site improvements.
Without having
yeah.
all the buildings done at
Yeah.
one time, but with that chunk of work and development comes a very specific mitigation plan, whether it be the town and/or the state to identify that. But that really comes into focus when we have a specific proposal. But, you know, as we've said already tonight, that control stays with the planning board so that the development is not scattered and premature.
Okay.
What's that,
That
Chris?
was the question I had.
Rick?
I'm all set for today.
Tom?
Excuse me. I believe you said that exit 4A is integral to the development, and that most of your examples tonight were dependent upon exit 4A being funded and in existence, correct?
On the east side.
On the east side,
Yes.
right.
And not completely, but substantially for that development program that's been identified on the east side. Could we still get development without exit 4 and have results that are similar to what's been proposed? Yes.
You mean 4A?
But it would be significantly reduced with that comparable level of traffic that would be heading down to exit 4. So, yes, it remains viable for a scale of development, but it really doesn't get maximized until exit 4A is in.
If exit 4A doesn't come in and the east side is scaled back, is there plans for increasing or offsetting that by increasing development on the west side?
Well, that was one of the sort of speculations that you could start to think about, and that was not the intention. And so what we're doing is we're reducing the maximum so that you could not, even if that didn't happen, move all the development over to the west side. No, there would be a reduction in the total development that could occur at Woodbine Commons if 4A doesn't happen.
How much of a
Well,
reduction? How much is coming over to the west side in that case?
Well, I think what we were saying, we'll have to take a look at the numbers. Roughly speaking, we were saying that that you could build no more than 70% of the housing on the west side. There's much more housing planned on the west side because it's more residential in part there today. But that you'd have to build, I think, a minimum of around 30% of the housing. We'll get the specific numbers and be putting those forward for you. the similar kinds of ideas associated with commercial development, for example. So, because I think it's important to understand that the northeast quadrant there, the WC12 area, has some very significant opportunities. There's a reason to put the interchange and the connecting road there, and it's land that's otherwise fallow and will not be providing some benefits. So it's not the intention to just hope that it happens, but to really work hard to make sure that there is a link between the land planning and the development planning and the infrastructure.
And there's a very rational tie between the land use and the traffic, and the reason the maximas are set there is to provide flexibility of land use. But the other thing that we're working on is how to relate it to traffic generation by major area so that the flexibility of use still remains, but we still relate it back to, regardless of that flexibility, depending on the mix there, we still don't want more than X number of trips to leave that quadrant and still expect to have results that are comparable to what we've analyzed. So there's a way of having flexibility of land use and yet looking towards regulations as it relates to traffic.
As a point of clarification, there's 800 units as a maximum on the east side at this point. And it's true that you can take essentially all of that development, the residential units, the commercial, the hospitals, hotels, and you can shift that theoretically to the west side under the current maximas and the opportunities to go back and forward. There's been a suggestion in the briefing packet that there would be some limitation from area to area, and the number's been thrown out there, 30%, I think it is. But I think you need to think about, rather than at this point, the land uses by sub-area, because there's a lot of shifting right now. So you need to think about the thresholds that the development team was talking about, as well as the increases in infrastructure over time. So we know that 4A is a ways away, and the bridge may be 2 lanes rather than 3 lanes. You need to think about if there's improvements, say, on Ash Street at the intersection with Londonderry Road, in terms of setting up a signalized intersection, how much traffic volume can that handle coming from the development? If you add to the equation the 3-lane bridge versus the 2-lane bridge on Pillsbury and Ash, how much more then can you add to the equation on the east side? And then 4A, so on and so forth. So at this point, there's no restriction on pushing all that development to the west side other than how much traffic generation can be had in each of these sub-areas.
That's basically right.
But see, my concern is this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but while Exit 4A might be in the 10-year state transportation plan, it's unfunded. Am I right?
No, it's not in this 10-year plan.
It's not in the 10-year?
No.
Okay, so it's not even in the 10-year plan and it's not funded. But
It's not funded.
your kind of integral assumption here is that it's going to happen.
Well, again, it's a condition. The intention, the reason it's being planned and designed and going through environmental impact statement process is an intent at some point to build it. And what the Woodmont Commons wishes to do is to plan for that potential future in a responsible way and make sure that there can be good quality development that occurs in the right location. If it does not happen, then that development can't go ahead, and that's what we understand. But the Woodmont Common approach is to say, let's move in good faith towards that direction and plan for it, but not count on it.
Okay,
And test along the way.
But wouldn't it be just as prudent to have developed a plan or a study or something similar to this with assuming that Exit 4A doesn't happen, and whatever you want to use as the additional development to the west side as a maximum?
Well, in a sense, that's
present
what
that to us so that we have 2 alternatives to look at?
Well, in a sense, that's exactly what you have in front of you. You've got a system, a plan that works if there's no 4A, and it works if there is one. And it shows you what the difference is. If there is no 4A or other potential improvements in other places, then the development couldn't be unlocked. It couldn't be triggered. But the plan shows you what would happen in either case. And it has a system of showing what the character would be, what the total development types would be, how much open space would occur under any of those scenarios. And because there could be many different scenarios in the future, where something doesn't happen the way we think it might. Well, very good. Well, how do we move ahead in a responsible way and adjust to that? That's what a master plan does for you.
So,
I'm confused by that. I don't think there's a no-build scenario in the transportation impact analysis. There's basically the assumptions that 4A will be built, and that's what the traffic generation is based on. But I think, again, you have to go back to, forget about the land uses, because there's too much pushing back and forward, and that's an issue that's got to be sorted out. But think about the thresholds that they're talking about in terms of those particular areas, the southwest, the southeast, and the west side. I'm sorry, the area above Pillsbury Road, south of Pillsbury Road, and then the east side, and how much those areas can accommodate in terms of traffic volumes, given certain incremental improvements over time. That's where we have to get at. I think this is a good start, but we need to think about where those thresholds lie in terms of traffic and in terms of trip generation in given areas.
And I think that's what I hear Tom's concern is, too.
Well, I think that basically the traffic study shows that there is pretty much a maximum build-out on the west side if 4A is constructed. I don't think that the traffic numbers leave a lot of room to load any more development onto the west side unless the land uses are changed around so that
Right.
the trips are different.
Right, and
You know.
Jane's absolutely correct.
so
that,
are you saying that if 4A doesn't to get built, and you decide to build whatever amount more into the west side, what you showed us now basically doesn't change?
Oh, no, what I'm saying is that if that was all loaded on the west side, that does not work.
And, but what we're not
So-
proposing to do, we're not proposing that it be loaded all on the west side. That's the key idea. It's not, and then we're bringing that forward, is to say, no, it's not the intention to say, well, if it doesn't happen, all the development happens. There are two areas of checking to make sure things stay balanced. One is the maximum development allowed in various areas, but then it's the traffic standards, and it's the mitigation that regardless is going to govern the amount that can happen. And the planning board is going to have a chance to revisit that as every major phase goes ahead to make sure that it is still working. And we believe, we're confident because we've used conservative estimates, that there are good solutions. But no, you can't just completely load up one area or it gets out of balance. So that's why we try to cut, it's sort of a belts and suspenders approach.
Thank you.
With the current layout of the site, just to put it in perspective, that there are key assumptions, and we want to make sure that it is understood by the board and the public as well, that those assumptions are important when we look at that full build-out. But the testing that will occur during that area plan, site plan stage is critically important for not only the board, but also for our client to make sure that those potential patrons or residents can get in and out of the project. So that testing that will occur will be when there is great definition to that proposal. But what's been laid out for the distribution of east and west uses, that triple left turn lane that comes off Garden Lane and heads back towards the highway. And yes, there's some conservative assumptions for growth rate and all, but the way it's been envisioned, that is maximized for its capacity. So in absence of other different improvements that maybe haven't been considered yet, that is more or less maximized on that west side, given the other things that happen. As the first phase is proposed or the second phase is proposed, it's an opportunity to test against not only the data that was used back at this time of this study as a reference, but what is reality at that time? You know, has traffic gone up or down? How are we doing for the generation of traffic inside the project? You know, how have we compared against the internal capture rates? And those internal capture rates, and I think, you know, Jane's made the comment that's not going to happen immediately. We're not going to immediately be at 35% or 23%, depending on the mix of uses that are proposed. So when we do have a very specific proposal, we'll have a study that categorizes all those things in a very accurate way at that time, but constantly testing against this document.
So if I understand you correctly, and I probably don't, but you're saying that you build this intersection to maximum capacity, And then from that, you work back and say, we can have that much development in the area.
In a sense,
Yeah.
in a sense, that's right. And that as additional development comes online, you check that intersection and say, how are we doing relative to those standards? Well, if it's filled up, well, you don't get to have more development. That's right, it gets to be a limiting thing. But you have to check it along the way,
Right.
and there are a lot of assumptions that get built into it. And if it turns out that the traffic isn't as much as we think, or the capture rate is, as you approach the build-out, is much better, well, then you can make a decision about using that capacity. But if the pipe's full, that's it. And we're sort of saying the pipes can be fitted out and set up pretty well. We can imagine good solutions. Maybe there are even better ones, but that's one of the limiting factors.
Thank you.
Cynthia, then I'll get you, Chris, then we'll continue with the board.
The next level of analysis that's going to occur is going to look at all of the other infrastructure pieces that are going to come into play here, and I'm assuming that it's going to go through a very similar process as the transportation piece did. And so that's going to add a lot more information about what these capacities may or may not be able to be.
Yeah, it's, this traffic is part of the equation. We have brought on a sub-consultant to participate with us on the utility assessment side, water, sewer. Although we had done some due diligence to investigate the global capacities of water service and wastewater capacity at the dairy plant, there's a different level of analysis and investigative work that our team is currently doing to look at that side of it as well, because if that is found to be one of the limiting factors in capacity, regardless of traffic capacity, there may be a series of measures, improvement measures that need to occur scaled with the development as well. So that's still in front of us.
Exactly, the same thing will also apply, that has to be checked all along the way to make sure that the capacities that may be theoretical today, the water's actually there. But we want to make sure that we're looking forward, and the planning board can reasonably say that what you're approving, it's not like you're approving a master plan that allows people to come forward in a sequence of really specific proposals, because it could work very well. That's just going back to that same idea on the infrastructure, same thing.
Okay, Chris?
On page 12 of the briefing, you had the table with the residential unit breakdown, west side to east side in total. I know the maximas on each side were above those numbers, but the total over both east and west was 1430 in our last briefing is what you were proposing. To Tom's point, these numbers, these traffic studies were presumably based on these numbers from the table, so 1,080 on the west side, 350 on the east side.
That's correct.
But further in the document, we talked about wanting to know what could move from one side to the other, and the number was mentioned, the 30%. That presumably is 30% of the maximum
Housing,
from that
yeah,
side,
and
the
the
housing
housing,
units,
yeah,
which I think was 800 or so from the east side.
I'd yet have to check, so I have to check.
So
actually.
200 odd additional units over and above this, so
Yeah,
I think we want to know what that number was, rather than just this with a percentage, is what would that maximum be that would come over there? I think the public would want to know that.
yeah.
But furthermore, what would that do to this traffic, the additional 200 units, and possible commercial coming over onto the side?
Well, and this is where it starts to get complicated. We'll certainly follow up on that question, and as we look at the land use. But if something goes up on one side, because their maximum for the entire development, they will go down on another side. And depending upon whether 4A is built or not, it gets to be actually quite complicated. And it depends on whether the additional housing, for example, that might happen on the west side, is resulting in less commercial, because there's less land available for commercial use. So what you end up saying is, really what we've got to do is to make sure that regardless of the combination that occurs, that the intersections work, and if they're filled up, you stop. And so if 200 additional units might work in some combination, without additional traffic impacts, well, that's an appropriate flexibility. If it doesn't work within that, then it isn't flexible. The flexibility is theoretical and not real.
I think
That's
from,
the idea.
from my position as planning board member, I would have to say I would want to see concrete information with the assumption that 4A didn't happen. Just to, that we know what the outcome would be, know what we're buying into for the town. It may happen, it may not happen. You know, this project has a lifespan beyond 10 years, so, you know, things could turn around and it could get put in that time frame. But I think you have to work with the assumption that what if it doesn't, rather than what if it does.
Right, and that's why we're looking forward to the process of identifying those regulatory thresholds, because really what it comes down to, and we've stated a few times, is that you can only push so much through the pipe, and that if you have a shift of a greater, say you had all the residential on the west side, well, that means that if we're trying to keep a similar traffic scenario, well, that would have a corresponding drop in some of the other uses, whether it's office or retail, so that we end up with the same sort of horizon, same sort of distribution and delays associated with traffic, that it doesn't create an unanticipated level of impact on one side or the other. We try to keep it proportional, but, you know, we could have, and this is one thing that we had contemplated as a group, both with staff and HSHs, we could have 30 different variations of the what-ifs, but what we're trying to do is present the most likely situation and come up with other regulations to be able to control how that flexibility of land use relates to traffic, or how it may relate to utilities, to be able to control it in any particular area.
Okay, we'll continue. John?
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank TEC for a job well done. It's very good analysis and study. Also, I'd like to thank Chris for asking a lot of the questions that we probably already would all have. But I'm going to be very blunt about something, because I'm hearing it asked several times in different ways. We would like to see a study with and without the 4A. Okay, want to make sure that's, because I'm hearing, oh, well, we have to do this, and we have to do that. That's great, do it, give it to us. Right, that's my blunt statement on that. Okay, thank you. Secondly, when you did the capacities and you have your west side, east side numbers, okay, a couple of things that I would like to see that if you could provide to us. One is the current capacity of each of the intersections that we're at as to a maximum. Okay, so you did the study, and we know what we have, and you say when the pipe is full, the pipe is full. I'm hearing that. What I want to know is, where are my pipes right now? Right, okay, because I think that's important for us to understand as we go through the planning cycles. For instance, when I'm looking currently at the 102 Gilchrist Garden Lane picture, that's basically where, for all intents and purposes, we're going to start. Right, and I need to understand, or I'd like to understand, what the capacities are in that particular area, but for all the areas, but mostly for there. And also have those areas broken down from an inbound, outbound trip perspective. So number of trips, inbound, outbound, expected inbound, outbound, because when we do play with things such as, people, we would like to have them live and work right in the area and no one moves. We understand that, but that's not going to be a reality. And if we do bring industry in, we're going to have a lot of inbound trips. So it'd be interesting to see inbound, outbound trips. Okay, as it also pertains to both 4 and 5, if possible. Okay, and again, with 4A, if it does happen. Okay, so a little more granularity is what I'm asking for at these particular intersections.
Yeah, a lot of the entering and exiting by all different land use is within the voluminous report for the current scenario, but I think I understand what you're asking for.
Yeah, I'm not, what would be nice is if we had a nice table, like you gave us. I think you gave us the 12 odd intersections.
Yeah.
If we had it in some type of matrix where here's our current loading, and then what the expected loading is, say, at full capacity of the development.
Okay.
Right, so something to kind of give us, some expectations of where we are, where we're going to be, what the loadings are going to look like, and where the loadings are going to come from. Not just, number of total trips.
Okay.
It'd be helpful
Yeah.
to compare.
Right, right. That's it, thank you.
You're welcome. Mary?
In listening to everything, I agree with what these gentlemen have said before me, but I also, it's my understanding that wherever you start is going to have an impact of where you go next. So whatever you build at the beginning is going to change what you can build in the future. So until we know, and you don't know, where you're going to build in the beginning, what we have to look at is this overview and understand that, that this is the best case scenario of how we can imagine that this will be, and that's where we have to start. So I do appreciate everything, all this work, it's incredible, and but I would appreciate seeing where we are now and where we're going to be. But I don't think anybody in this town that drives along Gilcrest Road or drives through Cross 102 believes that any of them are not already in failure. I mean, we already wait too long. We're already in too much of a hurry. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, if you want to get to a ball game, forget Pillsbury Road. So, you know, I don't think when we look at it today, I don't think we're saying, well, that's an A. You know, we know it's not an A. But anyway, it is valuable to know what it is right now.
Okay, I'm going to, tying off with what Chris and John were saying earlier, the size of the pipes, what I heard was kind of, that we saw tonight were kind of based on the table that's on page 12. That's the exemplar table. So, what happens to the size of the pipes if we go to the maximas for each side? The maximas represent quite a bit more development than the table has.
Short answer, won't work.
Won't work.
But as far as the analytical answer, that's,
Well, the thing that I'm not sure, I would make sure we're clear about this. The exemplar that you used, there are maximums within the sub-areas, but they're overall maximums for the entire development. And the exemplar was designed to demonstrate that overall maximum. You can't add up the maximum in all the sub-areas and move ahead. There's a total maximum number of housing units. So the question is just how different ways you might distribute them back and forth.
But on the
there are
west
limits
side-
on that, and there are limits on that on how much you can move those things around. So the exemplar was really intended to show a maximum development, not to show a midpoint that you could raise it up. And it was looking at a kind of a balanced approach, and then that sets the realization that there are performances that we think we can meet on the different roadways, but that if there was a different balance, it could be better, but it could be worse. And if at a point in time a certain combination showed up as being worse, then they would not be able to build the maximum in that area. So it's not that we tried to understate it, we tried to show what the maximum development would be.
No, and I'm not saying you
Understand
tried
that?
to understate it at all. I'm saying what it sounded to me like is you based it on what you considered to be the best case.
no, the most likely case.
Most likely case,
Yes.
well, yeah, and that's, okay, I agree.
I think this is a question that also relates to what we went through last month and a follow-up item on the land use issue, which is, yes, the scenario studied in the traffic analysis was a most likely or a likely scenario of how the full build-out might occur. But we have created some sub-district maxima that would also try to choke off how much of the density could shift within the project. There were plenty of comments last month that ability to move density around was offering too much flexibility, and that's one of the follow-up items that we reported on before and that we have to come back with as to how can we restrict some of that flexibility so that these types of test scenarios can pass, but at the same time give us the flexibility that would be inherent in either a PUD or a zoning plan, where you really don't know who's going to come forward with what proposal and what use, but you know that you've tested it at the 10,000-foot level, and there are ways to solve the problems that are likely to arise.
saying it another way, though. I understand what you're saying and where you're coming from. Now, looking at the total numbers here, let's just say the west side numbers as an example. We're basing, Route 102 on the numbers here on the west side, pretty much. The east side, we're talking pretty much all going to exit 4A. So, two different locations, right? So we have a residential unit total of 1,080 units on the west side in the table. Based on our new numbers, our new maximums that we're coming out with, I don't know what those numbers are, but let's say it's another 200 units for the sake of discussion. If we added those on, what would that do to, the presentation we saw tonight, the design presentation we saw tonight, or the concepts we saw tonight?
Yeah, it would, if that was the case and there's no corresponding drop in square footage, there would be an additional burden on those key intersections, say at Garden Lane and 102. Undoubtedly, anytime you load more on one side, it would have a greater impact unless it's mitigated by either making different and bigger improvements, reducing other types of lane uses in a corresponding fashion, so that the shift to 200 units, if it equated to an extra 100 trips in a peak hour, well, what would that corresponding drop of either retail or office be, so that we had a comparable situation? And that's the type of thing that we're trying to develop now, so that we take care of some of the what-ifs by controlling it in a different way. We don't take care of it necessarily in the flexibility of lane use, but we take care of it as, let's make sure, no matter what mix, we don't end up with a very different traffic
Yeah,
scenario.
and I think the challenge here is that the scenarios where you start to reach these maximum are 10, 15 years in the future. And this question, for example, the internal capture rate, how many people really are walking, we won't know. It might be better. So it's an illusion, I have to say it's kind of an illusion to think you can fine tune it to such a fine degree, which is why we've got to go back and check and make sure we've got standards all the way along, regardless, even with the scenario we have. There are a bunch of assumptions, and if an assumption changes, you have to be assured it'll still be all right. So it's that combination again that we're after.
Maybe asking the question a little bit differently then, how much margin is built into the design concepts we saw today? I mean,
That's based, it's the trip generation, the number of trips generated by each use, how they're distributed is very detailed by use, so that, the distribution of the retail trips is different from the office, it's different from the residential. It's done in the most accurate way we can do. Frankly, it's in a way that is much more detailed than if you were doing a regional planning study with Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission that would look at travel analysis zones, where this is significantly more conservative than that type of effort. But there is flexibility built in, really, with the conservatism of many of those factors that were assumed. So if I was to take a stab at a number, I'd say it's probably 15% higher than what could actually result when you look at the full build-out. But it's there as a responsible test of these intersections at this level.
okay, thank you. So, we talked briefly about right-of-ways and, state funding, town funding, and things like that. At what point in the process will we start discussing that type of detail? When we get to the site plan phase, or?
I'm sorry, I did have one question. You're not going to wait until 4A is on the books and funded before you start building, are you?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
But is that on the east side too? But I didn't hear an answer to my question, I'm sorry.
Can you repeat it, please? I'm sorry.
He said, I'm sorry, that he did answer the question, but go ahead. Ask the question again.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
We talked about right-of-way acquisition,
The stage at
state
which-
funding, town
Right.
funding. At what point in time do we start talking about the details associated with that?
That would be most appropriate at the site plan level, because then we would have a specific idea of impact for that phase, and we would know better what specific improvements we're proposing and how that relates to the right-of-way. But at this point, it would be speculation about what those needs are, and we've already stated that these are ideas, But there will be different ideas, I promise you. This is one of many opportunities to try to improve or mitigate, but there's not enough definition to that particular phase to get to the level of spending considerable resources on right-of-way investigations and survey without getting beyond the stage.
And I think to add to that, the part of in addition to the PUD setting some thresholds, the development agreement is designed to make sure that the relationship of when these things come forward and working together to solve them is predictable to process, and the way that the payments will generally work is thought through, so you don't just land on the next phase and say, oh boy, what do we do now? We had that old study. That is where you capture to make sure that everybody's moving ahead in a very responsible way.
I have some open space questions, too. I know we've been focusing
We'll
on
do
traffic.
a little
so-
traffic, then we'll come back with
Yeah.
open space.
That's it, thank you.
I just had a question about your opinion. When it comes to 4A, does the New Hampshire DOT take into account when they're trying to decide whether to go ahead with 4A, something like this development? Do they look at this and does it impact their decision to build it or not? That it would be very useful for a development like this?
Well, this is something that not only the state looks closely at, but the federal government, because the break in the interstate is a federal action, but it's managed, design process, the permitting, in cooperation with the two towns and the state of New Hampshire. So economic development is a factor in the both positive and negative impacts of a project. So when you look at the potential layout of the 4A connector, it is envisioned to solve regional traffic issues, but the benefit of that has a direct tie with the benefits for land development. And with that, the inherent development that would occur, that's all part of the planning that occurs. So that the work that's been done by CLD consulting engineers on behalf of the two towns over the past many years in planning the interchange, that contemplates not only accessing the existing development areas, but also the potential for the future development. And it's built into their models that are presented to DOT and ultimately to the federal highway as part of that final environmental impact statement. So it's all wrapped in as the development opportunities that would occur because of new access. And it's a conversation we have not only here, but across New England. Whenever you look at a new break, you look at not only the tertiary benefits regionally for existing traffic, but what gets induced for demand with new development.
Okay. The other thing I was going to say, although I think it would be interesting to see a what if there's no 4A scenario with some numbers. We kind of talk about this as though it's a 20-year plan and that, like there's a stop at the end of that. But I wonder, if any day you decide, whether it's in year 14 or 16 or 18 or 9, well, we can't, I guess they're not going to do 4A. Now we feel confident they're not going to do 4A. If you were to decide at that point not to develop the east side, well, then you've cut off your ability to ever develop the east side. I just don't see that. I don't think our experience thus far, I don't think they're normally going to say, we're never going to do this. I think it's more likely we're not going to put this in our 10-year plan. We don't think we're going to do this in the next few years. But at some point, I guess what I'm saying is just that they're very unlikely to tell you there's no chance. And for you to decide you're not going to build over there, so you're going to build over on the west side, you'd need to be fairly confident that there's no chance. Because you're giving up your opportunity over there if you put the development on this side. So
Right.
The important thing is that there is more than a chance, and it's heading in a very wonderful direction. But development is possible. But what has been studied to date does not contemplate the no access scenario to exit 4A, because I think not only our client, but the board and the town in general want to plan for that economic development, the potential tax benefits of having increased development within the town borders that is immediately adjacent to a highway when most of the traffic's coming off and on, where we want to look forward to that infrastructure being in place. But what has been planned assumes those important infrastructure pieces. In absence of exit 4A, something can still occur. It's just considerably scaled back to end up with something that has comparable results. But beyond this, we could potentially in the future identify, if that 15 years from now still hasn't happened, we could potentially identify the bigger fixes to access exit 4 in a way that responsibly mitigates those trips that are now destined for exit 4 instead of 4A, or exit 5 for that matter. But that is not something that we're contemplating currently, because we look forward to having that in place.
I think also the idea of the thresholds, if 4A were not to happen, the thresholds will establish what could happen reasonably within the traffic that could be there, and that it would still follow the kinds of design rules and approach. It's just not as much. It's just not as much volume of things, and we'll articulate that. And we've heard very clearly that we need to understand and structure what happens if 4A doesn't occur. But it would be. It's also possible that a plan revision might have to happen 15 years from now if the world is that substantially different. We're trying to create a circumstance, though, that you can look at a number of variables and know that you'll be able to control it within this entire area.
Well, I appreciate very much that you heard from our last meeting that the slosh kind of was too big, and we'd like to get that
Yes.
under control. And also, just this is really amazing. It's an amazing amount of information that's presented in such a clear and readable format. I'm not an engineer, and I had no trouble at all going through the entire thing and understanding what you were saying. I just really appreciate that. So.
I don't want to say this the first time I've heard that, but thank you.
All set, Laura?
How's that? Thanks.
Okay, Lisa?
Well, I don't want to beat the exit 4A topic to death, but understanding what I heard before, that it's not in the 10-year plan, all I have to say is that I'd like to understand, to capitalize on a couple of points that came this way. I want to understand then what's in consideration in those 10 years that it's supposedly not happening. So in other words, to Mary's point, one thing's going to happen, then the next. So I'd like to see from you as, I don't know if that's through this master plan. I mean, I would like to get some sense coming out of this master plan, what you're going to be coming to us with first, second, and possibly third, in the form of site plans following this master plan review. So I want to get a good comfort level of what you're looking to come to us with. So that's enough from me on 4A. One thing I haven't heard about is, what's the time horizon for DOT for exit 4? Because apparently there's,
no money.
No,
okay.
no.
So there's
Exit 4 is part of they're going to reconstruct the bridge over 93.
And again,
as
that's
part
not
of-
on any 10-year plan either?
No, that's part of the 93 widening.
That is.
2018?
Yeah, I believe it's supposed to be completely finished within 4 years
No,
or
I
so.
want to say 2018.
It's one of the
or something.
earlier action items.
That's when we're going to get the 2 lanes turning onto
Yes.
Wendy's.
Well, again,
Okay.
what you're going to see is you're going to see the bridge built to the south of the existing bridge. So it'll sit there for the bridge to nowhere for a little while,
Right.
but then it'll happen.
Okay, so,
So that's
I
a
hear
priority
that.
with the
Well, four-year priority.
expansion north of exit 3.
Exactly. Right.
Okay.
So I hear that, but I also heard a lot of comments from our traffic folks, yourself included, and as well as from HSH, that there's hefty mitigation involved along the Route 102 and Pillsbury Road corridors and whatnot. What I term to be the existing roads, the roads that are already there that are not inside the development, ready to be created. And forgive me, I don't want to come across as just taking the plan and looking at it and go, hey, what, I don't get it, but I go through all of these aerials, and I see a little inset box on every single aerial. And the thing that calls out to me is the thing where it says, "The planning board and the town of Londonderry may use this concept as a foundation for future master planning efforts as part of capital improvement project planning." And a little bulb goes off in my head and says, okay, so where in here, or when can I expect to see what percentage of these types of roadways is the town going to be asked to foot the bill for?
That's my question.
Any of it? Because I'm assuming nothing. But I don't know, maybe that's wrong. Is that wrong?
Right.
No, I think that we're looking for either next month, or the following month, to have a specific ideas about how those formulas will be established. This set the groundwork so that we can actually look at where and why and to the scale of it, so that that's the next step. And we're looking to do that in conjunction with other fiscal impacts that will be associated with the economic benefits and potential impacts, so that you can see how that will all play through.
So then it's not unreasonable for me or anyone else on this board to expect that as part of the PUD master plan process that we're going through right now, not waiting till the site plan review, but during this review, that we can get some of those ideas of
An approach, yeah, an
who's
approach
paying
should be
for
tied,
what?
an approach should be tied down for everybody knows how to do it. That's not to say that it's $856,000 and it's going to be 26.5%, depending upon, it's an overall approach and a formula for figuring out the allocations and knowing what that process will be in the future, so that it's fair and predictable. So that when you hit the site plan, you're not reinventing it. You can rely on that. And that's what we need to be putting together, making sure we check with the town, work with HSH to make sure we've got that approach. And some of that will be part of an agreement with the town, as opposed to the regulatory approval. And those two need to go together.
Yeah, and the footnote about the master plan and effort too is because some of these things are not necessary today. So in absence of the PUD, some of these ideas the planning board may still want to consider as part of a master plan that could or should be in place. When you look at the through connection on Pillsbury Road, trying to improve that cluster of intersections there, that is something that might make sense for the town, independent of the PUD. It's integral to the PUD, but, when you look towards long-term master planning for the town, some of those ideas may dovetail with existing needs as well.
And having just come off the town master planning process, I mean, there's a lot of things we don't disagree that we should do, but there's a difference between what you should do versus what you want to pay for it to have
Exactly.
done.
Yep, that's why we have those list of intersections always in our master plan that are always still there.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
So those are where my thoughts lie.
Okay.
But, okay.
Maria?
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on that, because I was thinking the same question. Of course, we're all working on budgets, so how do you figure out how much the town can afford? That would be between town manager, town council, and yourselves, and part of your development agreement. I understand that, but if you don't know which conceptual design is going to happen first, I think I would like to know, as part of a planning board, as one of the planning board members, as to which essential design is going to happen first. Conceptual design, road change design is going to happen first. That's essential. And then how we're paying for it, who's paying what. And I know you'll all come up with that, but the town's got to be able to afford it. So if the town is not willing to do, is only willing to do a certain amount, does that stop you in your tracks? That's my question,
Well, it's also part of the discussion that is still pending and in front of us about which, if any, of those roadways within the PUD are public. And, John raised some recent questions about that as it relates to the pending fiscal analysis. So, which ones are the primary roads that collectively between the proponent and the town are desired to be public, if any? Pillsbury would stay public. What are the expenses or additional expenses that can be envisioned with some of this widening of roadways for lane miles of plowing or salt use, or the other aspects
Or not salt use.
or exactly, or not salt use, to control those things that are all that picture of the fiscal impact, or what's being expected on each side. So that's still in front of
No,
us.
I think that's good, and I think this question about, there's certain phases, there's certain areas that there's kind of a logic to how the development will work in certain intersections that would be coming early on the process that we can start to describe.
That's
and take
what
it
I would
through,
like to know,
because
yeah.
it's, yeah.
Yeah. And my only other comment or question, by the way, I also love the GIS aerial views with the drawn-in roads. It was just so easy to understand your concepts of what you want to do here. But getting back to the east side of the project, on Ash Street, you have this East Main Drive after the bridge, after the Ash Street Bridge?
Yes.
Is that going to be the main way to get into WC 12, into that part of the area?
Correct.
Without 4A?
That's correct. With access from Pillsbury, that would be the primary access point.
Right.
But with the other 4A connector road, that's envisioned to touch down at
And I
Wilson.
get that, but
Yeah.
let's not talk about 4A
Okay.
connector road for a minute, only because we keep saying, what if that don't happen? So the East Main Drive Road, how far in does that go? I mean, not, you don't have to give me exact, but I'm just saying, does that travel pretty far in?
Oh,
or-
yes. It would connect about three-quarters of the way up into the east side to where it would meet the projected exit 4A connector road.
Okay.
But obviously, if exit 4A doesn't exist,
You wouldn't go that far.
would be truncated, without needing to impact land and all to get up that far.
So you would only introduce the drive only so far, naturally?
Well, it depends on where it's located, but
Yeah, and you get into a circumstance where you actually can have a cul-de-sac, but it's too far in without having fire access and multiple ways out. So that's what you get with a great big piece of land with one roadway. That's why the limitation on 4A is so significant,
Okay.
relatively speaking, and why planning and thinking through
Right.
what that opportunity is and waiting for it to come is such a valuable piece. And we'll show you
Right.
why that's the case.
And I totally get that, but, so in other words, you wouldn't even put in this East Main Drive for a while, right?
but that still is
Yeah, but
open, that could be, in a very small portion.
In a very
The
small
first
portion,
phase.
in a very small
Right,
portion.
right,
That's what I thought,
Yeah.
until 4A possibly happens.
Exactly.
exactly.
That would open it that wide up. wide
Right,
open.
and who knows, that could happen potentially before anything on the west side in a small scale.
Okay.
That's still well in front of us.
I just wanted to
Yeah.
understand what you were thinking with that. Okay,
I think
That's it, thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of information here, and I think you've done a lot of work. My curiosity is, how do you determine what traffic is generated from the site? There's probably a lot of formulas and assumptions made, but at least maybe give us a little
Sure.
bit of a handle on
Now's my
that.
job to put you to sleep.
I do like
within-
formulas and equations and everything, because that's part of what I do. So
Sure.
I'm not an engineer, though.
Within attachment G of our little study here, there's a whole section on trip generation. The rates are based on the Institute of Transportation rates from their publication entitled Trip Generation. They're industry accepted, many of which are conservative in nature when given that they're itemized separately, which is what we did. And that's why when you look at that internal capture, we add all these different uses together, and they all have different rates, whether it's a daily rate or a peak hour rate. We added those together, and then we applied that internal capture for those that would stay within the PUD.
Yeah, those are based upon certain standards that are developed in the
Exactly.
engineering field.
And it's the same methodology that you have probably seen the results of from other studies, whether it be for smaller projects along 102 or elsewhere, whether it's residential or retail or office. They're all standardized rates, industry-accepted rates. And some of these earliest calculations were actually in the original application, and of the earliest level of review that HSH had participated in. And beyond how many trips are actually generated, the other very detailed part, and is based partially on US Census data, is where people are coming from and going to. So once you get those individual uses, and where's Rebecca? She tracked all these separately with the rest of our staff. East side versus west side, by individual uses, by each peak hour, based on who's coming and who's going. So it's very extensive. This is something that is very comprehensive in nature, and it was acknowledge in the receipt and acceptance of the application, but having gone beyond that to say, okay, given that trip generation, that distribution, what are the likely impacts? And then what are the corresponding mitigation measures? So that's the extra steps that we've gone through in the past couple of months. That's been memorialized in this document.
Okay.
But there's extensive amount of detail, and I think the planning department has a few extra copies for.
Yeah, maybe bugging John and Cynthia about it.
Well, it's also online. Oh, the big one?
No, the big one,
No, the big one's not online, sorry.
The big one could be very, you have to read through it several times and then start to assimilate what's there. It's usually much
Right.
more scientific in nature than that.
I meant the little one, this one.
Oh, no, not that one. That stuff is not in here, so. But it's available for us to review.
Correct.
Okay, we'll go to the public, and this is just with the transportation only. Ann Chiampa, and then next gentleman, and so forth. You need to come to the microphone right here at the corner, and name and address, please.
Ann Champa, 28 Wedgewood Drive. Looking over the plan, it starts out talking about TND 3A. Now, that's the TND 3A that's in the original master plan from October?
Believe so, Steve.
Yes, yes.
Okay. In the future, is there any way we could have it provided in the document, just so we wouldn't have to go researching where it was originally? And make it easier when you're referring to it?
Okay.
Also, it's mentioned that Garden Lane, I believe, is now going to be called Orchard Drive.
That's the name for the purposes of the study. It's,
Okay. Just because we have an Orchard View Drive about 2 roads over, and I'm not sure the fire department, I think the fire department should be consulted if you do call it
I think
Orchard
naming
Drive.
convention will come along later. We are at the stage of, I mean, they're just for this master plan at the
yeah.
moment.
Because that's
The
right.
only reason it was called that
Goes
is
through
because
the
it went
orchard.
through the orchard, and the naming convention for the study is not necessarily the name of the road, so.
Right, it just wouldn't
Once
get
it-
confused
especially
with
once it
Orchard
gets into
View
site
Drive.
plan approval, then it's reviewed by the fire departments while it reviews.
But since it's like 2 streets over, and it also comes off 102, so that's why my comment was made.
Yes.
On Pillsbury Road, the intersection of Pillsbury and Hovey, was that area studied at all? Because I live north of the development, and I use the Hovey Road to Pillsbury to go east towards Derry all the time. And since there's going to be a large amount of development on Hovey Road, there's actually like 17 intersections on Hovey from the Woodmont area. There's going to be, if somebody wants to go towards Derry from the northwest section of the project, they may be, I would say most likely, go down Hovey Road to Pillsbury and over Pillsbury Road across 93 over to Ash Street. When I come home at night, if I'm coming 93 north, I'll take a right onto 102, go up Londonderry Road, Turnpike, whatever it is, take a left on to Pillsbury and a right on Hovey. So I'm sure people in the development, it's really easy access to that area. So if you might want to take a look at that corner. You talked about Gilchrist near Domino's Pizza. I call it Domino's Pizza because it's right on the corner there, and a possible access road across from Orchard Drive over to Gilchrist through that area. I remember also when it was closed off. And I believe that's private property, correct? That's not a town road because it's undersized, is that correct?
You're correct, it's private road.
Okay, and it's undersized compared to the town standards right now?
My recollection it is.
Okay. I'm concerned about that Gilcrest intersection. Right now, I think it's a hard time getting into it from Gilcrest and getting out of it from that private road. I also have questions about that area. If somehow, I travel to St. Mary's Bank a lot. Getting out of that intersection with St. Mary's Bank, not an intersection, from St. Mary's and that whole development in there, getting onto Gilcrest is sometimes hard to do. If that could be somehow, maybe an intersection that'd go, have a light or something that could cut across to that development also, that would make it easier for businesses in that area to operate more smoothly. Since that development is limited on 102 as far as how you can enter and exit that area. I think that Gilcrest Road entrance and exit from that property is important for those businesses also. And maybe not only can the area west of Orchard Drive, that whole development, the private development, but also consult with the owner of, I'm not sure of the name of the development, where St. Mary's Bank is. So maybe something can coordinate in to have a intersection right there that would benefit not only Woodmont Commons, but also the private development and also the St. Mary's development area. And I think that's the last thing I have to ask. And thank you very much.
Okay, Joe Maggio.
Thank you. Joe Maggio, 17 Cortlandt Street. I keep hearing mitigate, 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 and I'm curious of how we mitigate the Gilcrest Road situation. How many cuts do we have coming on to Gilcrest from the development?
Until they present a site plan, we won't know.
You don't know?
No.
Okay. Well, I hope
I think there was two.
I thought there were 2 or 3
There were two
last month.
proposed.
But we weren't allowed to
Conceptually.
discuss it because it wasn't
My
transportation.
thinking, there was 2 that would come out onto,
Whereabouts are they going to come out?
not quite sure. Maybe you can help us there. Steve's still writing it.
Yeah, we had a diagram that we showed where there were sort of zones potentially where they might daylight at Gilcrest in the previous, land use plan. But not just anywhere.
Well, are they south of Cortland or north of Cortland? Because the street's not that big, not that long. I'm just
Not
curious
one was
because there's a
right
lot of
after.
private
In the
property on the lower part, so I don't know where.
Yeah, Joe, in the conceptual diagram we had in the prior meeting, it was directly opposite Cortland. So it would make it a 4-way.
At Cortland?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
that'd be interesting.
Need a traffic light, maybe.
Okay. Something that just surprised me a few minutes ago, we're talking about, again, mitigating, and then, I'm glad you brought it up. The town's gonna pay for all these roads in order for this development to go through to mitigate the traffic on the outside of the development? Pillsbury, Gilcrest, Harvey, who's paying for? Thank you for that point.
It's a very,
You must pay taxes in this town as well.
it's a very good, good question. I think John might have some input on that.
Hi, sir. John Farrell. I'm a sitting member of the town council. No.
Thank you. Thank you.
As one member of the town council, he's saying no.
I think the other members sitting
Well,
up there
two
will
members of the
say
town
no.
council.
Another one right here, and sometimes Jim Butler is here also, but.
As a taxpayer, I'd say no as well.
Thank you.
I think
So,
that'd be the sentiment of the town council, and I think the majority of the planning board also.
So, if I
Yes,
may,
sir.
Mr. Chairman, can I address the gentleman here?
Certainly.
So, there's an article in the paper, okay? You probably never, have you heard this thing called Pettingill Road?
Yes.
Okay, so Pettingill Road's a $12 million thing. I'm the chairman of the CIP committee. I'm an 11-year planning board member. My fellow counselor, Mr. Frieda, and I sat on the planning board together. He's being too polite tonight. He would tell you, go read the minutes from the last people who come and the people for the last 10 years who have come in front of the planning board talking about traffic. Okay? You need to simplify whatever it is that you're explaining. Okay? Very simply, traffic is the Achilles heel of the planning board. It always has been. And respectfully, this chairman of this CIP committee isn't going to go out. I've been trying to get a $12 million road built for 10 years. And here's the quote from me from Monday night. We had someone come in with big hopes for Pettingill Road, said we should build it and they will come. I said to the gentleman who said this, I said, great. I said, I'm looking for some direction here. How do I convince the taxpayers that additional taxes will produce when you say it will? Sir, people don't vote for roads in this town. They only vote for improvements to roads. All right, and very frankly, sir, gentlemen, the intersections that you're talking about, unless you're going to come in here with a very defined plan, and I believe right now you know what 80% of the traffic is going to look like, and you can get this down to a much simpler explanation, because, you know, just as one guy sitting here, you're boring me to death. Right? You're not getting to the point. Right? You've got to explain exactly what's going to happen. I live in this town. They live in this town. We know what's going to happen when this development comes here. We know how it's going to get affected. I know you're looking at it as a scientific project. I get it. I sat on these boards and listened to this for years. If you don't bring this into an explanation that you can tell people within 30 minutes, nobody in this town is going to understand anything that you're talking about. All people really care about in this town is, is a few things. I want my kids safe in school, I want my trash picked up, I want the police and the fire department to come, and I want my roads plowed. Okay? If you don't get to some sort of simplicity in this, this is going to be a problem. You're not going to get anywhere.
You forgot low taxes, John.
You know what? We'll figure all that out. Okay? They're going to build, they're going to pay taxes, the town's going to have to figure it all out. That's why we're here. Okay? But very candidly, gentlemen, if you tell me that, or anybody else in here, that we're going to start paying for roads because you're building, hey, those roads have been fine for 30 years. We went from 6,000 to 26,000. You know what? Somehow we still get around town. You got to get this thing to some sort of simplicity. And you got to go from 3 hours to 30 minutes. With all due respect, I know you're doing your job and everything, but if you don't get to that level, you're not going to get anywhere. Okay?
Okay. Anyone else on transportation for the public? Okay, yeah. Name and address.
93 Gilcrest. I like all the proposals for some of these intersections that we've seen tonight, because I've seen pretty much everybody in the room nodding their head that they're all substandard, and they've been that way for 15 years, at
Longer,
least,
longer,
if not longer. So what I see is that these improvements that they're proposing are going to get us back to zero, and that's before they put a shovel in the ground and get started. And I don't care how many turning lanes they propose. It's still 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag. When you put 700 or 800 housing units on the west side, it's too much. I don't care how much traffic you dump onto 102, it's still going to fill up. I just don't think it's going to work.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Jack?
Jack Simplinsky. I'm a property owner in town. I don't live in town, but I have considerable interest in Londonderry Commons and the Drive, and I really like to see some idea. I like some of the ideas proposed by the traffic people as far as making some improvements to that. I mean, that particular road carries Commons Drive from Gilchrist over by Chinese restaurant there. That carries probably as much traffic as High Range Road, and it may not be a town road, but it still carries tremendous amount of traffic, and I've seen very many close misses there, especially there's very precise distance and geometry, especially somebody taking 290-degree turns. It's very, very dangerous. So I'm really glad to see that happen. I was also involved in a number of issues in planning through this town. So I know some of these intersections we have been looking for years, and unfortunately, we all approach them from very small scale. As John mentioned, from perspective of improvement, not to really making a master plan and doing something. So I think some of those things are very positive. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Yes, I see a hand back there. And name and address, please, and come to the microphone.
Virginia Landry, I'm at 27 Wedgewood. I'm concerned about the potential for traffic, and I'm talking about the areas of WC 9 and 10 off of Hovey, constructing housing in there. We already, that section of Wedgewood that I live on is between Gordon and Hovey. And we get the traffic from Hovey and parts of Gordon kind of as a cut through to get out to Hardy Road, to go up to exit 5, to come to this area, to cut across Otterson to get to the schools. And I can see, the potential for a huge volume of traffic, going down my block. And right now, nobody goes 30. I mean, it's a cut through. And I can see the need at some point of a traffic light to back out of my driveway. So that's my concern. Is there any traffic, assessment of the streets that are nearby, not necessarily, the cross sections like the intersections, but just the nearby residential roads that have been there for 30, 40 years?
I know they're writing here, so.
What TEC has looked at thus far is not any of those residential roads.
There's also I was going to say, if Gordon makes a big loop, about halfway around, it looks like the start of a road that just never, it goes into the orchard. And that looks like it has a lot of potential for, another cut through, which would really basically destroy that neighborhood in terms of traffic. I mean, it's just a very quiet, loop of a road that doesn't really connect anywhere except other residential roads there. And now if that connects into, a big city, that's going to really change the whole, the whole feel of that neighborhood.
I know where you're talking about, but again, right now, I can tell you from the conceptual plans that they presented, they're not showing anything connecting into Gordon.
Okay, even if they don't connect into Gordon, what about the cut through on, my block, out to Gordon, out to Hovey?
It's a valid concern, and again, all I'm saying is that they didn't look through, in this particular study, they didn't look through the.
Yeah, I didn't see Wedgewood on the list at all there, so that's why I wanted to bring that up, because that's where I live.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on to open space. I'm looking for staff input.
Well, before we move off of that, Art, per the last couple of folks, I mean, I talked earlier on about I had it's Gilchrist, but Hardy Road. I think we should ask that whole impact on the northern-facing, residential roads that, will be abutting into this,
Yes.
be included in the study, and we see what kind of traffic's going to flow out up there, because it will happen.
All the way up to exit 5, right?
Yeah, exit 5, it's going to draw it all north through those. So Hubby Road is going to get clobbered, and I didn't even think about that when I was looking at this.
I think it'd be helpful for us to arrive at a judgment.
I agree. I mean, traffic is like water. It'll find a place to go.
Yeah, the easiest way.
People find different ways
They'll
to
find the
alleviate,
easiest
get
and
around.
least resistant path.
Start at that end this time.
Okay. Yeah, you're my lead off.
Just change it up.
Okay. Staff, open space.
No question, no comments on open space.
Cynthia?
Not just yet, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, okay. Anything for well, so I'll start with Maria down at that, the other end. I'll spare Chris. Thing is, by the other end, all the questions are gone.
I'm cool with that.
That's okay, you answered, most of our questions got answered, coming from that end, so it was good. Hi. I did have a question, in the WC3 area where the pond is, the proposed pond. Way back when we had charrettes, we talked about possibility of a little amphitheater being built around that, and ice skating in the winter, and that being possibly one of the civic, we're calling it now a civic area. And I remember it being said, well, we have to see what is feasible, in that area, before we can promise you anything. But at the time, we were talking about what the Woodmont would, being developed would do for the community, and those things were mentioned. So I'm wondering, around the proposed pond area, is there any of that thought process for civic space for the community? Specific things that the community will benefit from around that pond area? Has there been any further thought about that? I know that that's a far-out thought, but...
No, I don't think there's been any further thought specifically in terms of what the design might be. I think that, and it's very tempting to visualize access, and one of the things that we are saying is that there's going to be a limit to how, from an ecological and environmental standpoint.
Right, and I get that, yeah.
And that's where it's difficult, but to have an access way, a pathway that goes around that is on the outside of whatever that limit is.
Right.
So that at least that amount makes a ton of sense, including that same kind of approach on the drainage network that would lead from there and through the development.
Right.
Beyond that, it's tentative, but the notion would be
The actual
that
uses of the
there might,
pond.
yeah, there may need to be other civic space nearby connected to it. How close we can get to the pond, I think
Right.
is a seriously designed question we just haven't
Right,
gotten to.
right.
Yeah.
Aesthetically, it would be a wonderful
Yeah.
area to be able to use with civic space, so that's what I was wondering about.
Yeah, that's.
I know it's wishful thinking, but I also know that it was spoken about at the
Right.
charrette, so that's why I'm bringing it up.
You
Yeah.
bet.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Lisa?
Okay, so I by no means am any conservation person, but I've had a lot of,
We're going to have input from a conservation person.
good. I mean, I don't see my trustee Mike Speltz here tonight, or
Oh,
Deb
he wrote a
Levins.
nice letter.
But they've always been helpful in articulating stuff for me in the conservation area, so I'll do my best, and hopefully I'll make them proud here.
I think Cynthia wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, would it be helpful to read Mike's message that he wanted read into the record, and then maybe it
okay.
would guide Letha
Okay,
a little bit?
okay, that's what I
Yeah,
thought.
I'll take care of it.
Oh, you got it, great, okay.
Yeah. So this was addressed to Cynthia, and it's from Mike Speltz. I'm unable to attend Wednesday's planning meeting due to a previously planned visit to friends out of state. Could you please ensure that the following comments regarding the Woodmont Transportation and Open Space briefing are incorporated into the record of the meeting? My comments regard the open space portion of the briefing. I note that the PUD ordinance requires a 50-foot landscaped buffer around the perimeter of the PUD. The ordinance also lists preservation of open space as one of the specific objectives that a PUD should incorporate. I emphasize preservation, which implies protection from development as a result of the PUD master plan and not the result of existing regulations. The briefing claims to be preserving 143 acres of open space. However, an examination of the constituents of the open space to be preserved leads to the conclusion that most of the proposed open space is unavailable for development. The required 50-foot buffer contains 36 acres that cannot be developed under the PUD provisions noted above. The vast majority of 39-acre area WC3 is jurisdictionally wetland or wetland buffer that cannot be developed under state wetland rules in the town's conservation overlay district. Much of the 9.5 acres of open space proposed in area WC8 is jurisdictional wetland or wetland buffer that cannot be developed under state wetland rules and the town's conservation overlay district. An estimated 20 acres of the 35.5 acres of conserved open space in area WC12 is jurisdictional wetland or wetland buffer that cannot be developed under state wetland rules and the town's conservation overlay district. The 3.5 acres of open space proposed in area WC4 likely falls along the duck pond and wetland and cannot be developed under is jurisdictional wetland or wetland buffer that cannot be developed under state wetland rules and the town's conservation overlay district. Thus, of the 143 acres of proposed open space, at least 105 acres, and he notes 36 plus 39 plus 9.5 plus 20 plus 3.5, is unavailable for development. Of the remaining 38 acres, roughly 18 acres is proposed west of I-93. This includes playgrounds and plazas that add amenity value but little ecological value, that are spread across 5 acres, five areas, WC 6, 7, 9, 10, and 11, and half-acre or smaller sites totaling 2.5 acres. Another 1.5 acres are designated in WC 1GL, which is already larger paved. Based on the foregoing, it appears that perhaps 14 acres of the roughly 392 acres west of I-93, or 3.6%, will be available to preserve key natural resources that might otherwise be developed. Although the plan includes agricultural open space as an open space category to be included in the master plan, it does not appear in the table of open space minima. In fact, the PUD land west of I-93 contains nearly 200 acres of significant agricultural soils, much of which is prime agricultural soils, the most valuable such soils in the state. These two facts, the presence of an extremely valuable soil resource and the lack of a plan to preserve these soils, shown both by the absence of a minimum for agricultural open space and the designation of only 14 acres to be protected from development west of I-93, constitutes a serious flaw in the PUD master plan as it is being proposed. I urge the planning board to advise the proponent to remedy this imbalance between potential financial gain and certain destruction of an irreplaceable resource. For additional background of how to balance open space and development, the board may wish to review the standards it's set for conservation subdivisions. And he lists, first one is 3.3.6.2, the second is 3.3.6.2.2, the third is 3.6.2.7.1.1, and they are standards to determine open space. The minimum restricted open space shall comprise at least 40% of the gross track area. CO district areas and wetlands as defined in section 4.7. Slopes exceeding a grade of 25% of at least 5,000 square feet contiguous area. 3.3.6.2.7.1.3, and we have Tom to thank for doing this, right? Tim Thompson for doing all these wonderful numbers. Drainage facilities, drainage easements. 3.3.6.2.7.1.4, land used for septic systems, and 3.3.6.2.7.1.5, floodways as shown on official FEMA maps. While the PUD, did you guys write all those numbers down?
We provide a copy of this anyway.
While a PUD is not the same as a conservation subdivision, the goals of both types of development reflect the statutory authority to implement innovative land use controls aimed at harmonizing development with the protection of natural resources. I thank the board for considering these comments. Mike Speltz, 18 Sugar Plum Lane. So, having read that,
Oh, he stole my thunder, but I feel
And-
vindicated knowing that he would have been proud. I actually
Right.
keyed into a few of these things, so that's great. I have been listening to him. Yes, I noted several areas that I thought perhaps might be wetlands, but he's already covered that. I think he mentioned it a little in there, but I guess my question to you is, has a minimum been either declared or stated for any agricultural open space? Because you've noted it on other types of open space, but not specifically agricultural.
No, there are no minimums, no.
Okay. And then, kind of following the theme of his comments, when I was starting to do a lot of this master planning stuff, I would just be educated more on it. I never really understood, but do now, the idea of sort of a contiguous flow of open space. It's not just pretty parks, it's not just lovely green spaces, but rather this, for lack of a better term, contiguous flow for ecosystems, as he called it, to animals to migrate and whatnot. And looking at the picture, and perhaps maybe just the picture doesn't do it justice, but in future pictures, I would like to see some more of that sort of contiguous flow of open space. Maybe a little more thinking involved in showing how across this entire property you could show, or at least longer stretches, if you will, of that open space to help protect those resources.
I have nothing further to add.
I asked a question yesterday of John Vogel and Cynthia about what our generally accepted definition of open space is. And in the town, we have 4 different definitions, unfortunately, but they're all fairly similar. And I think what we have with the plan is a really different definition compared to what the town of Londonderry considers open space. So as an example, circulation open space, I don't consider circulation open space as open space. It just doesn't tie in with the way we've defined it on other projects or within our zoning regulations. I'd like to see the plan rewritten so that the definitions are similar or exact to what we have, in use in our zoning regulations. So we know what's open space, we know what's green space.
Yeah, I guess the idea, for example, on the infrastructure open space, the roadway standards that we'll be putting forward are designed to have, in some cases, some important landscaping as part of what is there, and we think those should be set up as standards. We're not counting that as open space towards the overall, minimums here, but we wanted to note that because we think it's a benefit, and we've created, in a sense, a kind of a definition to ensure that there will be that kind of open space in the future and that there are standards to do that here. But because it's not defined, we have to add a definition to make sure there is an additional kind of open space. So that was our thought. We're actually adding definitions to provide for those things. But, and the idea would be to have some regulations that require that. You don't need to have them.
But, the definition of open space versus what I consider green space, something along a road boulevard, I don't consider that to be open space. I think calling it open space in the plan just confuses the situation, in my opinion. And the other question I had, we have a diagram on page 35 showing the different types of open space, and I look at TND1, and TND1 has a lot of green on it, and the 2 diagrams don't really agree with each other. I didn't know how they were supposed to, or if they were supposed to. TND1, as an example, just shows a tremendous amount of green space on the east side of 93. And I look at the diagram on page 35, and there's very little. And so it just, they don't tie together in my mind. They may not be, they may not supposed to depict the same thing.
Right.
But when I see green and green, I think open space.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge, that when we have the TNDs that were illustrations of one way it could work, but we're trying to move to a circumstance where we have acreages and standards about where that would be, rather than suggesting it will be in a specific location. The key idea there is that there are a number of wetland resources, and the idea of connectivity is built into the notion that they would be connected, but that the layout and the design of that would come along with, in conjunction with the development. But so we're shifting the way that it gets expressed a little bit, and so that's understandable. Yeah.
And I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I think we just need to keep that in mind as we keep referring back to the T&D diagrams, though, as they were presented, because they may not be representative now of where the plan is at, or where your thoughts are at with the plan.
I'd like to just point out there that that's a very good point. And with the diagram that's on 35, which is labeled as open space, that's very different, not only from TND1, which is the overall conceptual plan, at least that's the way it was originally presented. But what was in the October 3rd application, TND 19, which was open space and landscaping. The diagram on 35 essentially is showing you constrained land, environmentally constrained land, wetlands, associated buffers, drainage areas, the proposed pond, or an enhanced impoundment, which I'm not sure what it is. But the T&D 19 from the October 3rd packet shows much more conservation land. A lot of it is also constrained environmental land, but it does also show a small network of trails, some specific civic and open spaces, including recreational fields, throughout different parts of the proposed project. So that's a question I have is, my understanding was that through this process, that a lot of these concepts would be refined. And it seems like this is a step backwards. You know, they're pretty clear in terms of the distribution of passive and active open spaces and constrained open spaces. And now we're really just sort of talking about constrained land, and we're sort of pushing the idea about passive and active into the series of regulations which we have not seen yet, so.
Well, I think what the TNDs which we've explained were an illustration where buildings are, where open space, where roads may vary considerably from any of those diagrams. There were multiple diagrams that were referred to in the original application, the completed application in addition to the TNDs. The way to establish an enforceable, predictable approach has not been to, it's not that we're moving backwards, we are capturing the core ideas through a series of regulations and rules, and we've been quite specific. That's what these tables and the amounts and the acreage are really intended to do, is to translate, instead of saying, here's a picture, but it might not really be this way, well, it's really meant to be this area, and these are the reasoning behind it and how it would be approved. So, and that's going to be consistent throughout the presentation. So that's why we're putting the specific information forward. It wasn't in more detail. It wasn't in the application.
Well, I would say that the T&D, series of T&Ds, including the overall concept plan, as well as the open space and landscaping, were intended to show generally the layout of buildings and uses and open spaces and landscaping and parking, and the street network. And they have since been sort of distanced from this briefing process. You know, for example, what you're now labeling, what used to be T&D, is now labeled as a development example, and there's other references to it as a representative visualization, not intended to represent specific use, distribution, layout, or location. And I think that's the question, is that the series of T&Ds, which essentially created the conceptual framework for the whole project, have now kind of been distanced from this whole briefing process, and I'm just confused as to which one applies. I understand the idea that ultimately we're going to get to regulations that are going to cover development as well as open spaces, but we haven't seen those yet, and so we haven't. Have we seen those?
Well, what we're proposing here are the regulations that would be applied at the overall PUD level. There will be more specific.
They'll be integrated into that overall package of development regulations.
That's
right now,
right.
you're showing some general ideas of different types of open spaces: civic, active, and passive.
Correct. And
Those will be integrated into a series of development standards that we're going to be seeing.
Correct. And
sometime soon.
we put some of the preliminary ideas here, and the next session is intended to get into that level of detail about the individual spaces and how they would be put together. And these are intended to be the regulations that would govern overall how much open space and the types of open space.
Okay, I understand that going forward, but let's go back for a second. Where do we stand between that series of T&Ds, which I thought was presented as a conceptual series of land uses and open spaces and parking and street networks, and where we stand today with some of these new briefing diagrams, which are stripping a lot of that off and showing basically, in this case, open spaces, just showing simply constrained land. How do we, you know, how do we?
I think we've tried to explain in the briefing documents consistently and in the outline that we have that the TND, there were many different TNDs, so it's not helpful to say which one necessarily, there were 17 or 18 or whatever they were, that there was an illustrative plan that showed one way that the PUD could play through in the future, but it was not intended to be the definitive plan, and recognizes that a significant variation on many of those elements could occur, and that was built into the idea that specific site plans would be coming forward for review according to a series of rules and regulations that we're now advancing.
Well, I don't think they were presented that way in October. I think that they're presented as a conceptual overall plans, and
I'm just, yeah, I will take, we'll certainly take into account the questions, and we'll see if we can come up with a way of responding to it, yeah.
Question here from John.
So it sounds to me, and from what I'm hearing, that HSH needs to review this a little bit more, because you're asking some questions, and as our consultant, I think these are the things that it seems that we still need to work through. I heard Mike's statement earlier, and it sounds like, you know, the Conservation Committee and the Open Spaces Committees have not been consulted as far as the town is concerned. Is that true?
I'm not sure as far as.
Okay, so, I mean, basically, as far as open spaces are concerned, I think it would be beneficial if, obviously, you know, this type of conversation, although I think it's beneficial for us to hear, as our consultant, you probably should have worked through and looked at to see what was being presented, right? And then dealt with the questions that you're having. Also, with the consultation of the other agencies that we have in town would have also been beneficial as far as how we treat spaces and so forth. And I think that's being, you know, courteous to us as well as us to you. Yeah, because right now, to me, this looks a lot like it's, you know, here's what we'll do with the land we can't build on, right? So I kind of feel this is not as well planned out as the other components that we've seen thus far.
I think probably should go at least to meet with the Conservation Commission, which Mike Speltz is on anyway. So I think you could probably from Mike Speltz get most of what the Conservation Commission feels anyway.
Right. It seems as though what they've done is just taken the land that you can't build on and called it open space and tried to give it a definition so that it will be acceptable to fall under whatever regulations we already have. I appreciate that the master plan doesn't have to follow any of the regulations we currently have. You can make your own rules. We can say, we don't like those rules. Those are not rules that we want to have as part of this master plan. So,
But I mean, the overall theme within our PUD is that we utilize our current,
right,
both site plan regulations,
exactly, and that the
subdivision
open space
regulations.
definitions that we have are the open space definitions that you adopt.
But keep in mind that the overall master plan for the project prevails over site plans and subdivisions. So
Right.
you have to have something to refer back to.
Exactly.
And what I'm saying is there's a little bit of
Disconnect.
uncertainty between some of these new documents, these new graphics, and what was submitted officially as part of the October 3rd application.
Okay, so there's been regression. Lynn?
And I just have a general question, and maybe out of line to even ask at this point in time, but when we go through and approve or disapprove the final master plan, will it be updated? Will the TND diagrams that we received back in October be updated to reflect the current situation that we're being briefed on today? I would hope that they would be.
Yeah, because usually once we see, let's say we had back in October, the expectation is there'd be a continuation. If things change, we should be, you know, made aware of what's changing.
Yeah,
and why it's changing.
yeah, the idea is that we had put together an outline of all the different components. As we go through the briefing and preparing that will become the superseding document that is the regulating document itself. So the document that you'll see will become, it's the difference between the application and then through this process, the final documents. And there's a place for all of the pieces. And part of the idea is to certainly keep track of historically how this whole plan developed and what the application was, but then to have a series and it will be extensive. There will be many, many TNDs in effect. But there is a question about, that, I think it's the best I can do, and what we're doing is trying to prepare that and get all the pieces assembled so you've seen the key portions of it before it all drops on your desks, yeah.
I'm all set, Art, thanks.
Mary?
I'm all set.
Go. Tom?
I was wondering, when did open space now get defined as land that contains significant agricultural soils? As if that's now some sort of restriction that can't be developed on. I mean, Woodmont used to be an orchard. I'm sure there's a lot of significant agricultural soils there. So I'm just wondering, what's this expansion that Mike is talking about in his statement? And I think it's at the top of the second page, Mary. In fact, the PUD land west of I-93 contains nearly 200 acres of significant agricultural soils, much of which is prime agricultural soils, the most valuable such soils in the state.
I don't think he's saying that is a new category. I think what he's saying is that of all of the land that they propose to call open space, none of it is this prime agricultural space.
No, I understand that what they've identified is stuff they can't identify, they can't develop. But Mike's has mentioned this on numerous occasions about this 200 acres of land. And, frankly, I have real problems with a planning board that has permitting authority, essentially, for lack of a better term, shaking down the applicant here for 200 acres of land to be preserved, which is essentially taken away from him without compensation.
I don't think Mike's saying take away 200 acres.
Well,
I think he's
then you and I
saying-
got a disagreement here, because I can read a sentence, and that's what it seems to me. It says, you preserve 200 acres of land because they're prime agricultural soils,
No, he's
which
saying
frankly
we would
flies
like you
right
to
in the face of the
consider-
Fifth Amendment.
He's saying we would like you to consider some of that land as part of the open space that you're going to preserve,
I think
not
we-
all
Yeah.
200
Yeah,
acres.
I think
Well,
we need Mike here also to
Yeah,
probably
but
further
This is
define
not
what he...
what, he has mentioned this on numerous occasions.
He has, and
Okay,
he,
and what percentage of the 200 then, Mary, are we supposed to?
I think that's what he's asking.
whatever it counts.
I think it's
in.
exactly what he's asking, what percentage? There's no minimum.
Well,
Well,
yeah, that's why I
I'm
asked the
just-
question,
Saying
is
the
there a
total
minimum?
200,
And the
he's
answer is
saying
no.
there's nothing
So they asked and
identified
answered.
on this of any of that land of a minimum
But I think
percentage.
he's just bringing it up.
He's making the point, yeah.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
making the point, it's not to...
Yeah, well, that's, I just have real concerns when a board with license and permitting authority does this kind of, let's take something from somebody.
I don't think anybody is
well-
saying that they should, I think you're interpreting it incorrectly.
Well, I think you're misreading the sentence and the
Okay,
intent of,
I think we need Mike here to...
And we never disagree, Tom.
no,
Okay, anything else, Tom?
no.
Okay, Rick? Chris?
Continuing on from Tom's discussion, I had one word about this, it's woeful. I see a lot of what Mike's put in here, and the numbers for conservation or open space is just flabbergasting. And to Tom's comment about, taking of, basically, stringing you out and holding you up and saying this land's got to be conserved. There's a compromise going on here. The POD process is designed so that we've got some flexibility. You're asking for more density, and with that comes some, adjustment to giving some open space in here. And this gives me nothing for wanting to go and say, okay, you can have a higher density, that wouldn't be regulated in the AR1. And I'll leave it at that. I think there's got to be a lot more work done on this one. The comments about what was in the original proposal with the TNDs, I expect this to get refined. I expect those to change over time, so I'm not going to go back and harp on you about what you proposed. We're going to have this discussion here, but to me, it's a it's a discussion and a compromise on what will we give in order to what will we get. And this didn't give me much.
I mean, because we can ask, but we might not always get, but, you know, it's worthwhile asking anyway. It's really up to the developer to provide what they want.
It's an exchange. And,
But it's a negotiated type of thing, so.
Just my opinion, I think open space is the biggest weakness we have in the PUD ordinance too, because we don't specify any minimum open space requirements.
That's us.
Yeah, that's, okay.
And that's the problem, since we don't have a set number here, a set percentage. And this is an applicant.
Like we do on a conservation.
Conservation
Yeah,
subdivision, there is a percentage that is specified,
Yeah.
so.
That's
I
the
think
problem with this.
Yeah,
Well,
it probably was just for the flexibility, but sometimes too much flexibility.
Well, whatever it
a
is, the
problem.
fault lies with our regulation, and you-
So this leads me to an assumption, and perhaps I'm assuming incorrectly, and I don't want to assume incorrectly, so I ask you then, if, you know, Mary had brought up before the notion that what is denoted as open space currently is areas where you can't develop on, but I see it as there are areas that you can't necessarily develop on in some of those 4 areas, WC3, 4, 8, and 12. I'm not saying the whole areas, but specific areas with regard to wetlands. So my question is related to, I'm starting to assume then that are waivers going to be requested for this to build on areas that right now you can't?
No, they're saying all of the wetland area would be preserved as open space.
But that's not denoted here.
That's what,
That's what they're calling
That's what-
open space.
I don't see anything
No, I
in
mean,
those specific areas that are wetland specific. I don't see green stuff here.
well, I think what they need to do, they'll hear our comments and everything, and they'll go back and discuss it.
Okay.
Maybe a little more of a detailed map, come back with more illustrations.
Yeah, I think
That'll
they-
be helpful as a
I
visual.
think they have a feeling from the discussion here, and, you know,
It's not enough.
we'll come back. I think it needs a little more work anyway. It's, yes. Any comments from the public on open space? Ann Chiampa.
I just want to make sure I understand this. The buffers are considered open space?
they've listed them as open space.
Okay. There's some specific areas that I don't see any open space, like WC 10, I believe. And it could be WC 9. I'm trying to get a hold of all the different portions of the documents. It's a little difficult. Those major areas where residences are. And I'd hope that open space would be, some open space would be there for the people who live in those areas, so they wouldn't have to walk too far to find some open space. It would be nice if, with all the different maximas, that they could have also the percentage of open space or just the amount of open space within the specific areas that are usable for the residents. That's possible.
You're taking notes, I know. We'll see next time what happens.
Right. As far as open space, I'm not sure if this is appropriate to talk about now, but in the past, there was discussions about leaving apple trees as part of the buffers. And I believe that's listed under WC 5 on page 35.
That's along Gilchrist Road.
Yeah, along Gilchrist Road. Is that the only area that it's going to be apple trees as buffer?
I think at one time there's some up in the northern part, that area like
Abbey Road.
Steve, I think. if
I
you
I
look
was
at
curious about Hovey Road area, because I see
Oh, I see.
what the orange area means. Does that mean the 50-foot buffer? Is that the 50-foot buffer that's supposed to separate the outside of the area from
It goes all the way around.
the buildings within Woodmont? Is that what it is, the 50-foot buffer?
I notice it's around all the periphery.
Right. Is that?
Yeah,
That's-
the
okay.
orange line represents where the edges of the 50-foot buffer, where there would be potentially either incompatible uses or residential uses along the outside edge. Even though there might be residential uses of a similar scale, the idea is to keep that buffer and keep that green feel along those edges where the orange is. And in some locations, we talk about orchard-like plantings. In fact, the trees themselves, whether they're the same trees that are there, and there's a lot of regulation about agricultural trees, but to keep that character, and we've noted your question about along Hovey Road, where it isn't indicated, but in some cases, it's shown that the buffer itself might have those kind of plantings within it. So it would be both those things, but we're beginning to signal the character, and we have been focusing along Pillsbury and Gilchrist Road, but we've noted your comment about Hovey Road, and it doesn't show it there.
Yeah, and I think also, from last month, the mention around the cemetery, some more green space there because of the.
Well, definitely
I think
more
it's
open
preserving
space.
some of the feature of the land. That's something.
Because when I was going through the plan, I was noticing some areas, like there's one area that's 17 acres, and it has like 0.3 of an acre of open space in that whole area, a 17-acre area. And also similar WC9 and around there, there's really not that much open space. So I hope for that part of the development, it could be more proportional to where the residences are. So they'd be very open for the people to use it.
So it kind of blends in, but also it's can be used for walking or observing nature, I guess.
Right. No, we will listen to very helpful comments, and we'll take them into account. Thanks.
Anything else from the public? Oh,
Got one more.
okay. Yep. Just name and address, please.
Hello, if I may. Miles McDonough, and I'm from Massachusetts, but I have an interest on Hovey Road,
Yes.
as I've spoken before. The one thing I'd just like to, I guess my question is, it seems like on some of your open space, you're letting the individual development for the individual projects bring forth what and where these places are going to be. The one thing I can say is, from someone who lives in a town that's pretty much hit build out, and I've spent the last 10 years on Conservation Commission and community preservation, desperately trying to purchase land and make a contiguous circle in our town. It's not hard. You have an opportunity to do something here that would be really, really nice, and then extend it out to the rest of the town. And if it means telling someone, sorry, this is where you're gonna have your walkway, that it might be worth it. You go out west a little bit to Ohio and things like that, and some of those places, and fortunately, they had people with money and stuff that donated their lands, and they have that. You have Boston, you have what should have been the Emerald Circle. But another 30, 40 years, you're going to be desperately trying to piece together little places just so you can walk without having to, walk along the road. Just want to throw that out.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? No, we have given, between the board, staff, and public, plenty of information. I guess it's back to.
Do you have something you want to say, Cynthia?
Cynthia?
Just when the time comes that I would recommend a motion to table this to March 13th.
According to continue to March 13th.
Continue, yes.
Yes, and then, is any, I guess the schedule will be worked on for the next month. I think we have a schedule anyway, and we aren't meeting on the fourth Wednesday in February. So
We are not meeting on the fourth
We're
Wednesday.
not.
meeting.
I'd like, oh, yeah, Jack.
Okay, Jack Falvey.
I appreciate the expertise that the applicant has brought forward. We've now gone through 6 hours in January and in this meeting. And we have a consultant sitting here that has prepared 36 items. I brought this up at the end of the meeting in January. You said that you would address these 36 comments items that our consultant has brought up on this project at this meeting. We tried to, you can check your comments on it, but I asked at this time, 10:30 at night, January meeting, could we address the comments that our consultant has brought forward, and there are 36 of them. And you said, yes, we will get to that in February.
No, you can check the minutes, Jack. It's not there.
Regardless of what you said, here we are. These people have had 6 hours of presentation since January. The original comments that you requested were in 2010. We submitted 125 of them in 2011, and I have copies of those. And now, we hired an outside consultant, and they've come up with some very, very strong comments and questions, particularly on this east and west business, which has been all through the program for the past 6 hours. And I think it's about time that we scheduled the public's consultant to come forward and rebut some of this ongoing presentation. If you plan to run these presentations for another 10 hours until April before we can actually comment on what's going on, I'd like to know that, because we want to show up at these meetings. We had a good crowd here tonight. 30 people have left because it's now this hour of the night. So I thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. But this is not doing any good for the public, and this is not giving us any input from the consultant that's been paid for. So thank you very much.
Well, I said at the beginning of the meeting, Jack, that we'd be addressing it after the staff reviewed it on March 13th. And as far as input, we have transportation tonight, and we have open space tonight. And there's plenty of time for input. And I'll take a motion to continue this
So
to
moved.
March 13th.
Second
Motion by
that.
Mary, second by Lynn. Any discussion by the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Abstentions, show as affirmative. And this hearing is continued to March 13th, 7 p.m. right here. You're welcome.
What's that?
This is the one I brought with me, I think. that-
And we have one more item to take care of. And this is a public hearing. This is a growth management ordinance, and it is in regards to the determination of growth sustainability. That's
That's,
I'm sorry. Not right. No, not right here. We'll print another copy.
let's see. Cynthia.
Cynthia.
Sorry.
We need to get moving with.
Yes. It's kind of hard with all the noise.
Yeah,
Okay.
get the overhead up there.
This is the 2012-2013 Growth Management Ordinance, Determination of Growth Sustainability. This is a public hearing.
Excuse me, Jimmy, could you take conversations out in the hallway, please? We still have business to conduct.
Every year, the planning board evaluates whether or not the growth management ordinance will be kicked in according to some very prescribed criteria. And those requirements are spelled out in section 1.4 of the zoning ordinance. Additionally, the board must also make a determination based on the 1998 ordinance, which was the former section 1304. The determination must be made by March 1st of each year. The current ordinance requires that 2 of the 3 criteria to be met declare unsustainable growth and would limit building permits. The 1998 ordinance requires that all 3 of the criteria need to be met before you limit the building permits. What's criteria? In the present year, the number of building permits authorized by the building department exceeds the average rate of dwelling unit authorizations in Londonderry over the 6 preceding calendar years. And by present year, we mean 2012, and looking at the 6 years prior to that. The second criteria, is the percentage of increase in housing units over the preceding calendar year equal to or greater than the rate of increase in housing units for that preceding the year summed up across the 6 municipalities that actually abut Londonderry, including Auburn, Derry, Hudson, Litchfield, Wyndham, and Manchester. And if we get past the first 2, the third one would be that the maximum rate of dwelling unit authorizations whose projected demands can be adequately serviced and provided with facilities at a prudent level of fiscal strain based upon school enrollments versus school capacity, a strain on public facilities, and the percentage of total budget appropriations made up of capital improvements. Okay. Criteria 1, 6-year average analysis. I have to tell you that the average over the previous 6 years for the town of Londonderry was 44 in 2012, and this is according to the U.S. Census, authorized 16 residential building permits. So that condition is not met, and because that condition is not met, which is very similar to the conditions in 1998, the 1998 GMO does not apply. Criteria 2. The number of housing units authorized by Londonderry grew by 0.18904% between 2011 and 2012. And the number of housing units authorized by the building departments in the abutting municipalities was 0.34318. Therefore, that condition is not met. So, given that 2 of the 3 of the 2002 GMO criteria have not been met, and 3 of the 3 criteria of the 1998 GMO have not been met, staff recommends that the planning board make a determination that for 2013, the town of Londonderry will be in a period of sustainable growth, and that there will be no cap on the number of building permits issued. And this decision will end on December 30th of 2013.
Public hearing, so I'm going to get input from the board first.
See if Jay has anything.
You got anything?
Jay's not a resident.
Anyone from the public have any comment, questions, concerns concerning our growth management ordinance sustainability of growth? Seeing none, I'll bring it back
So
to the
moved.
board.
Second.
And I have a motion by Mary, second by John. Any discussion by the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Abstentions, chair votes affirmative, and we are still in a period of sustainable growth to December 31st, 2013.
Motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn, second?
Second.
Second by Mary. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.